Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for all coming tonight. This is obviously the Planning Applications Committee meeting. Before I start, I'd just like to go through a little bit of housekeeping. So first point is the evacuation procedure. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside the Virgin Money building, formerly the Yorkshire Bank, on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door by which you entered the room or by the fire exits, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. Please make sure that mobile phones are switched off or turned to silent, please. And just to let people know, this meeting will be recorded and will be sort of downloaded onto YouTube. So if anybody wishes to play it back, it will be there. Okay. Apologies. I have one apology, and that's from Councillor Rudkin. I'd like to thank Councillor Phillips for stepping in tonight as a substitute. Minutes. Do I have somebody to propose the minutes from the last meeting? So Councillor Evans, thank you. And seconder, Councillor Smith. I shall sign those off. Okay, next item number 4 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they need to make which haven't already been registered? So, just go around. Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. At the start of the year, I had some contact from the applicant and from some residents on item 2, so I shall absent myself at the appropriate moment just to be on the safe side.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 6, Ambleside Leisure Centre. I've had contact with the chairman of the Leisure Association there, and I've given my support to this application as the cabinet member responsible for sports in Nuneaton and Bedworth. So I will be leaving the meeting during. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Concord.
Thank you very much, Chair. On item 3, I commented on the original layout of the cycle path, but the design has since been changed. So I just know that if we're doing contacts, I have been contacted about the cycle route on that by both of the objectors, but I obviously haven't expressed any views. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Concord. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, 2 items for me. Item number 5, I've been supporting residents objecting to this application for quite some time now, so I shall absent myself. I would like to comment on it before I leave the chamber though. And item number 7, I've had contact there and done a site visit, but haven't disclosed any voting intention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And I have one declaration of contact as well on item number 5. So I have been messaged. I've explained to them that if they want me to comment and get involved, then it sort of makes my position difficult in terms of us voting. So they're happy with that. So hopefully I can carry on as per normal. Thank you. Okay, so that's declarations out of the way. And that brings us on then to our first agenda item for tonight. So I'll hand over to Claire. Thank you.
This application is to retain an already built doormat to the front and canopy roof to the side. The original scheme was approved in March 2020 and was for a dormer to the front and rear and a new first floor window to the side. The current application has been submitted due to an enforcement complaint as the dormer was not built in line with the previously approved plans. After visiting the site, officers considered that the amendments were acceptable in planning terms and an application was invited to formalise permission for the amendments. The amendments are, in terms of the front dormer, This has been built 20 centimetres higher and 35 centimetres wider than the previously approved dormer. A canopy roof was added to continue the existing canopy roof across the front over the existing carport. That element wasn't shown on the original application. The application was deferred at committee on the 7th of September in order for members to carry out a site visit to assess the impact of the dormer and canopy roof on the street scene, and that was carried out earlier this afternoon. Objections have been raised, raising issues such as the property is no longer in keeping with the area, with larger windows and is finished partly in render. In terms of the impact on visual amenity, both elements are visible from the street. The overall increase in the size of the dormer from that originally approved is comparatively small. The dormer is set below the existing ridgeline of the main house, and the property is set back from the footpath by approximately 13 metres. The canopy roof is a continuation of the original. As there is a mixture of house styles in the street, officers consider that it would be unreasonable to refuse the application on visual amenity grounds. In relation to the impact on residential amenity, as the dormer and canopy roof are to the front, only the neighbouring properties either side, which are numbers 10 and 12, are likely to be impacted on. Neither element infringes either the 45 or 60-degree guideline from the centre of any front-facing windows of habitable rooms, and therefore it is considered there is no detrimental impact on neighbouring properties. It is therefore considered that the proposal is acceptable in terms of visual and residential amenity, and the recommendation is one of approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Claire. So there was a site visit that was conducted tonight to have a look at this property, so I know a number of members turned up, so thank you very much. Do I have somebody who will move the motion in front of us to recommend? So thank you, Councillor Smith. Do I have a second that to enable debate? Thank you, Councillor Markham. Okay, so I'll open the floor then to any comments on this item. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we should go straight to the vote. So all those in favour of the recommendation? All those, I'm sorry, hang on, yeah. All those against? Okay, and was that unanimous, was it? Lovely, thank you. Okay, so we'll move to our second agenda item, if we may. Please, Claire. Okay, Darren, are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. In your own time, thanks.
This planning application is for a partly retrospective planning permission for the formation of car parking spaces, new land levels, retaining wall and boundary fence at land at and rear of 92 Coleshill Road. The site is accessed off Coleshill Road, and the vast majority of the site is within North Warwickshire's area, with only the very southern part within NBBC's area. This grey line on the plan, which hopefully you can make out, delineates the boundary, roughly, between the two authorities. So it should be clear, hopefully, that this is the only element of the proposal which is on the Nuneaton Bedworth Borough Council. The key issues to assess in this consideration of this application are the principle of the development, the impact on residential amenity, the impact on visual amenity, flooding and drainage, and the impact on highway safety. Just to be clear, the majority of this development is not within our area, and just the southern tip of the site is. A lot of the works have already been carried out, with some of the works being proposed and continuing to be built. The proposed end use of the portion within NBBC's area is as a car parking area. The boundary wall and fencing are ancillary to this use, and therefore the principle, at least, of the proposal is acceptable. The land levels have been raised by around 2 metres, and there is a further 2.4 metre fence on top of that. 11 Chancery Lane is the property which has its rear garden running parallel to the new boundary fence. The fence will provide some privacy and will help to mitigate any noise issues created by the car park, but will have a significant enclosing effect on the rear garden of Chancery Lane. There are lighting columns also proposed, and a condition has been recommended by Environmental Health to cover these. On balance though, given the open aspects to the garden, the harm to the private rear garden of this Chancery Lane property is considered not to be so significant so as to warrant refusal. The new boundaries are concrete retaining walls with high, close-bordered wooden fences. The large wooden fences are highly noticeable from the rear gardens on Chancery Lane. There is some harm to visual amenity of this part of the borough as a result of the works. However, this harm is isolated to only small parts of the public realm, with private gardens mostly affected. However, it is not considered that this harm is so severe so as to warrant refusal. In regard to the impact on flooding, which was raised by some objectors, as mentioned, the majority of the site is within North Warwickshire, and very little of the built form is in our area. It is not within NBBC's area, but large surface water storage tanks have been installed within North Warwickshire's part of the site, which they considered to be acceptable. It is considered that the part of the site on us will have no significant adverse effect on flooding or surface water drainage. The access and manoeuvring space to the site is all within North Warwickshire's area. Warwickshire County Council highways were consulted on the scheme, and they have no objection subject to some conditions. Additionally, on the larger part of the site, North Warwickshire required a road safety audit to be submitted before the approval of the scheme. This was submitted and scrutinised by Warwickshire County Council and deemed acceptable by North Warwickshire. It is considered that the harm to highway safety caused by the development within this borough is minimal and is acceptable with the conditions proposed. In conclusion, and on balance, the development is considered to be acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren, for that. So we have a proposal in front of us which is to recommend and grant planning permission, subject to conditions as printed. Do I have somebody to propose? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Croft. Do I have somebody to propose that so we can move to the discussion? Thank you, Councillor Evans. Do I have a seconder? So I will start with Councillor Smith, thank you. So we can now move to the discussion. So are there any speakers on this matter? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you. First, a question for the officers. That fence area, is that actually in the bit that's in Bedworth Borough Council's area? Because that does seem quite a blot on the landscape. I mean, this is a sort of application, normally if it had been entirely ours, I'd go for a site visit because it's already built, I believe. But I say it would be useful if the officers could clarify which visual bits are in the borough. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'll just change my pointer. This part of the site is on Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council. The boundary runs roughly parallel to the southern boundary of the site, which hopefully you can see there. As I move back through the slides, this fence is that southern boundary that I just highlighted. So hopefully that's answered the question, Councillor, and hopefully that's clearer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to Schedule 4 about the car park not being used after 10:30 in the evening. How would we enforce that as a planning authority? Because I don't see a condition in there that some sort of barrier is put in place, like a gate that the future facility would put down after 10:30. So it would still be an open car park, surely.
That's correct, Chair. The actual access to the site isn't on us. So we couldn't enforce any condition that was for a barrier or related to the access. The use of the car parking that's on us is proposed to be limited by conditions, and that would be down to basically it being used outside of those hours, which is a breach of condition, which we could then investigate should enforcement complaints be raised. But there would be no physical barrier that we could place on that site.
Thank you. Councillor, does that answer your question? Yeah.
So you say we can't put a condition in place that we mandate the applicant to put a gate or barrier in place to operate between 10:30 and 6:30. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Essentially, yes. So only the bit that's within the red line is part of the application, and only the very southern tip of the site is within our jurisdiction. So we can't have any control on things that are outside of our borough. So although we could put a condition on, I think the inspector would deem that to be an unreasonable condition because it wouldn't be relevant to the permission that we're granting, as it would be outside of our area. That coupled with the fact that we couldn't enforce outside of our area either. So the boundary runs roughly halfway through these parking spaces. So there's no real physical barrier that we could put in place that would maintain that condition.
Councillor Evans.
Yeah, whilst I will support it, are we able to speak to North Warwickshire Borough Council about what conditions they've put in place? I know I'm not asking for it to be part of the conditions, but I think a friendly word from our planning department to theirs to ask about a potential barrier with the applicant would be useful, because I do see quite a number of complaints coming from this if it's going to be an open car park after 10:30. We have all sorts of problems up there with drugs and ASB, so yeah.
North Warwickshire have already approved their application. I believe the conditions are broadly similar to what we have here. I don't believe there's any condition on the North Warwickshire side that puts in a barrier. There's no real recourse they could have retrospectively to put a barrier in, as far as I'm aware. Also, I mean, obviously this is somewhat conjecture, but highways may not have liked a barrier to be there because of highway safety matters. That's generally conjecture there, obviously.
Okay, do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to, it says about all lights are showed on the approved plan should be turned off between 10:30 and 6:30. Is that the same condition that North Warwickshire has put on?
Okay, so I've not seen any other speakers, so Councillor Condicourt.
Thank you, Chair. I was listening to the other questions to make my decision, but I think, given the blot on the landscape this is, I would like to move refusal on grounds of impact on visual immunity. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder? So there's no second, so we'll move to the... Is that a seconder? Yes, no? No? They can't do that? No. Right. Okay, so we'll move to the original vote then, in that case, which is what we recommend to grant planning permission subject to conditions printed. So all those for, please. Okay, those against? Okay, abstentions? Okay, so
Chair, can I just have it note, apologies for being late, first I was stuck on another meeting, but could I just have it recorded in the minutes that I've abstained only on the basis that I wasn't here for the whole of the presentation, which would have made it procedurally unfair on the applicant?
Yeah, as is quite right and proper. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Okay, so we'll move now to agenda item number 3. I understand we've got several speakers, so just before we start this, I will just remind speakers once the presentation is over, you'll be allowed 3 minutes in which to make your point. Okay, that will be timed, So we've got several speakers, I think 2 of them are statements now, which will be read out by Mr. Richardson, and then we've got a speaker on behalf of the applicants as well. Okay, so Claire, whenever you're ready, I'll take you a minute or so.
This application is for an approval of reserved matters for the erection of 360 dwellings relating to appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of an already approved outline application. The outline application established the acceptability of the principle of the development, and this current application is dealing with the details of the scheme. A mixture of 1 to 5 bedroom properties are proposed, including affordable housing. Public open space and infrastructure such as footpaths and cycleways are also proposed. Objections have been received as detailed on the agenda, raising points such as increased traffic and congestion and the need for sufficient pedestrian and cycle routes. 2 letters of support have also been received. Notwithstanding the comments received, the application is also being reported to committee at the request of Councillor Condacor. In terms of the principle of the development, this has been established through the approval of the outline application. Policy DS2 of the Borough Plan sets out the hierarchy and roles for each settlement in the borough, with Nuneaton having the primary role for employment, housing, leisure and service provision. Policy DS5 of the Borough Plan refers to a number of sites that will be allocated for residential development and associated infrastructure, and this application forms part of allocation HSG 10. This sets out the key development principles and expected form of development. Officers consider that the requirements of policy HSG 10 have been accommodated on the site. An illustrative master plan was submitted with the outline application, and it is considered that the reserved matters is in general accordance with that. In relation to housing mix and the needs and housing needs, including affordable housing, Policy H2 of the Borough Plan requires 25% of all new developments to be affordable on sites of 15 dwellings or more. A total of 90 affordable units are proposed, which does equate to 25% and is therefore acceptable. Of the affordable units, 24 are 1 bed, 40 are 2, 20 are 3 and 6 are 4. The housing team have confirmed that they have no objection to this mix. The Affordable Housing SPD recommends a 10-year split of 74% social affordable rent to 26% intermediate housing mix. The proposed 10-year split is 73% affordable rented and 27% shared ownership. Planning policy have confirmed that as this is close to the requirement, it is considered acceptable. The Affordable Housing SPD states that to promote inclusive communities, affordable housing should not be identifiable from other forms of housing within a housing development. It should not be located in the least desirable areas of the site, but distributed evenly amongst market housing. The SPD also provides appropriate cluster sizes which depend on the size of the development. For sites of between 200 and 500 dwellings, it recommends 3 to 8 clusters, with a maximum of 15 in each. It is considered that this is met as 7 clusters are provided, which are spread evenly throughout the site, and they're shown there on the screen, encircled by the red circles. There is one cluster that has more than 15 units, plots 63 to 70 and 46 to 53, which are up here. They have 16 units in total. But given that plots 63 to 70 are a block of flats and have a different road frontage to plots 46 to 53, this is considered acceptable. Both housing and planning policy have no objection to the layout and distribution of the affordable units. In terms of the general market housing, Policy H1 of the Borough Plan states that development is required to provide a mix of housing types, sizes and tenures, based on the need and demand identified in the most up-to-date strategic housing market assessment, as well as the characteristics of the surrounding area. The SHMA indicates there is greatest need in the borough for 3-bed properties, followed by 2, then 4-bed. In this case, a mix of 2, 3, 4 and 5-bed properties are proposed. The borough plan does state there is a lack of executive or aspirational homes in the borough, which can impact on attracting potential business investors to the area, and such housing would be considered favourable, providing that the mix is within the general ranges indicated in the SHMA. Given that the majority of the dwellings would be 2 and 3-bed, it is considered acceptable that some larger 4 and 5-bed properties are also proposed. In relation to visual amenity, the Borough Council commissioned a number of landscape studies which inform the Borough Plan. The Landscape Capacity Study of 2017 analysed the landscape character of this potential strategic Borough Plan site and the impact of developing them. The study sets out a number of recommendations if the site was taken forward for allocation, which have also been taken forward in Policy HSG 10. These include a landscaping and biodiversity habitat corridor to be provided on the eastern edge, public rights of way in the site to be incorporated within green space corridors, new street tree planting, planting of new woodland copses and hedgerows, and the provision of public open space in the eastern part of the site. The proposed built development is outward facing in relation to the proposed open space, Eastborough Way and at entrances to the site. This provides visual interest and a positive relationship between the different uses. As per the outline permission, access to the site is off Heart of England Way. This will form part of the primary road within the site, which is of a circular arrangement. Off the primary road, there are a number of secondary and tertiary roads and private drives. A series of footpaths, cycleways and a green corridor are proposed throughout the site. The dwellings are predominantly 2-storey with some 2.5. There is a mixture of terraced, semi-detached and detached properties which provides a sufficient variety. Materials consist of brick with some render and other details such as canopies, chimneys, sill detailing and bay windows. Officers consider that this adds interest to the site. Boundary treatments would consist of 1.8 metre high brick walls where private gardens adjoin roads and the public realm, and closed boarded timber fencing elsewhere, which is considered acceptable. In terms of residential amenity, a noise assessment was submitted with the outline application. This demonstrated that suitable internal noise levels can be achieved for the development, provided that mitigation is implemented. This will be in the form of a noise barrier and suitable glazing and ventilation. There are conditions on the outline permission that require these details to be submitted for approval and subsequently implemented on the site. Environmental Health have confirmed they are satisfied with the noise assessment that was done as part of the outline and no further assessments are required. In relation to existing properties, distance standards are met in compliance with the Sustainable Design and Construction SPD. In terms of inside the site, distance standards are generally met. There are some instances where they are not met, but it is considered there are mitigating circumstances. For example, as shown on the screen, plot 10 here to the side of plot 8 is 12 metres, and distance standards would normally require 14. But plot 8 is angled away and there are views past. This slide here, plots 110 and 111 to the side of plot 112, again is 12 metres and distance standards would normally require 14. but it is not considered that much of each plot is affected and there are views past. Plot 94 to the blank wall of 95 is 12.5 metres, but in this case the ground floor is served by French doors and a window with views past, with plot 95 also being angled away, which reduces the impact. A total of 119 dwellings, which equates to 33%, comply with the additional building regulation standards M42, which means they are classed as lifetime homes suitable for adaptation. Rainwater harvesting will be provided through the provision of water butts, reduced water flow kitchen taps, water efficient shower heads and eco-flush toilet systems. Condition I has been added to ensure further details are submitted. In terms of passive solar design, the site is on an east to west axis along 100 metre block structured lengths, with buildings generally facing a north-east and south-west orientation to aid in achieving natural passive design. This ensures that habitable windows are orientated where possible to encourage maximum solar gain. The applicant will also seek to meet thermal gains through building regulation approval and the internal layout design and materials which distribute heat circulation positively. In terms of secure by design, the scheme has been cross-referenced against the principles of secure by design and broadly conforms. Warwickshire Police have no objections to this. In terms of highway safety and accessibility, as per the outline permission, access to the site is off Heart of England Way via a 4-arm roundabout. This will form part of the primary road within the site, which is of a circular arrangement. Off the primary road, there are a number of secondary roads and private drives. Emergency access is also proposed off Eastborough Way. As part of the outline application, this was As part of the outline application, highways improvements have already been secured through that outline permission. These include the provision of a controlled signal crossing on Eastborough Way, which would link the application site to the existing cycle network, the replacement of the existing mini roundabout on Crow Hill Road Eastborough Way junction with a signal controlled T junction, and the widening of the Eastborough Way Lutterworth Road Highfield Road roundabout. County Highways have been consulted, and after the submission of amended plans and information, they have confirmed they have no objections subject to conditions. A road safety audit has been submitted, which will be reviewed by their safety engineers as part of their legal agreement process. In terms of parking provision, 1-bed homes are to have 1 space, and 2 to 3 bedroom properties are to have 2 spaces. Any large 3, 4 and 5 bedroom properties across the site will have up to 3 spaces each. The parking provision will consist of private allocated parking in garages. The council does not currently have any saved car parking standards, but has recently consulted on the Transport Demand Matters SPD, which does include parking standards. The proposed parking provision is in general accordance with those standards. The SPD does state that 3-bedroom properties plus should have 2 spaces per dwelling. Some of the large properties on the site would have up to 3 spaces, but given they are larger properties with 4 and 5 bedrooms and the SPD is not yet adopted, it is considered that this is acceptable. The MPPF outlines need for planning to promote walking, cycling and public transport and to make the fullest possible use of these. There are 2 public rights of way which cross the application site, which are coloured blue on the plan on the screen, so probably can't make it out, but along here and down here. Public footpath N36 runs east to west, and N37 runs in the south east corner of the site. A formal diversion of these rights of way will be required, which the applicant is aware of and has submitted an application for a footpath diversion order. County Rights of Way team have no objection subject to the making of that order. A range of schemes are proposed which will improve accessibility to and from the site by sustainable forms of transport and therefore reduce the reliance on the private car. As part of the outline permission, a number of schemes were secured. These include a toucan crossing on Eastborough Way, which would link the application site to the existing cycle network to Attleborough Fields and the town centre, and a combined footway and cycleway from where public right-of-way N36 meets with Eastborough Way and would run down the eastern side of the carriageway and continue to the Crowhill Road junction and join the existing footpath network. Section 106 contributions were also secured for cycling infrastructure improvements for the creation of a combined footway cycleway along the existing path that runs north along the north existing Crowhill estate. So down here. Improvements are also secured towards cycling facilities on Attleborough Road and cycling infrastructure along Eastborough Way. Contributions were also secured to support the provision of a bus service to the site, which would run Monday to Saturday between 7:30 a.m. and 6:30 at night. The bus service will enter the site and provide a route in the form of a loop to the northern part of the site. All of the dwellings would be within a 400-metre walk of the service, which is acceptable. Inside the site, a green corridor will run through the centre of the site in an east-west direction. Footpaths and cycleways will run along this corridor and provide links to the open space to the east and will connect up to Eastborough Way and the proposed toucan crossing. A series of informal paths, cycleway and connections are proposed to the open space and are shown as purple and yellow on the plan on the screen. Connections and links in the form of footpath or footpath cycleway connections are also proposed at the south of the site, which provide connections to Crowhill Recreation Ground. A connection is also provided at the southwest of the site, which would provide a link to Crowhill Local Centre. 2 footpath and cycleway connections to the southeast are also proposed to connect to the Crowhill Recreation Ground. The Parks team have no objections to subject to conditions, including further details of the surface material of some of the paths within the open space. In relation to flooding and drainage, the majority of the site is within flood zone 1. The north-east part of the site is located within flood zones 2 and 3, with the River Anchor and a small tributary watercourse adjoining the site. As the built development will be entirely within flood zone 1, the Environment Agency do not have any objection. In terms of surface water drainage, as per the outline application, sustainable urban drainage systems are proposed, one to the north-east and one to the north-west, together with supplementary attenuation tanks. There is a condition on the outline permission that requires full details of the foul and surface water drainage schemes to be submitted for approval. Revised surface water drainage calculations have been submitted, which the County Flood Risk Team have confirmed are acceptable. In terms of ecology and biodiversity, the new public open space to be provided within the site will retain the existing grassland, hedgerow and tree features and will include meadow grassland and an enhanced ecological area towards the northern end with additional planting. A wet grass mix is also proposed to the very northern end of the open space. 3 scrapes are proposed to the northern meadow area. These are shallow ponds which hold rain or flood water seasonally and which remain damp for much of the year. They have gently sloping edges which create obvious water features in fields and can make a significant difference to wildlife. Condition E has been added for further details of these to be submitted. The Parks team have also requested a condition for details to be submitted of how the suds basins are to maximise their benefit for wildlife. This is covered in condition C. An arboricultural method statement has been submitted for the application. This identifies that the majority of the existing trees and hedges would be retained. Some trees are proposed to be removed from the southwest corner of the site and other parts of the site to allow for footpath connectivity. The majority of these are category C and are of lower quality. The loss of some existing trees is mitigated by a new planting scheme. A new length of native hedgerow is proposed to the front of plots 296 to 298 to the south of the site. As landscaping is a matter that is being considered as part of this application, full landscaping plans have been submitted. These propose a mixture of new planting, including trees, shrubs, native mixed hedgerows and marginal planting. Notwithstanding these plans, the Parks team have requested further tree planting and details of seed mix which has been secured through conditions G and H. Turning to contamination, this was addressed as part of the outline application. A Phase 1 contaminated land report was submitted at that time. There was a condition on the outline permission relating to the submission of a contaminated land assessment and remedial strategy. In terms of air quality, an air quality assessment was submitted as part of the outline application. This demonstrated that there would only be a small increase in pollutants at all model receptors, and that the impact is considered to not be significant. Since the production of that report and determining the outline application, an air quality SPD has been adopted by the Council. Environmental Health have no objections to the current application, but have requested conditions covering a dust management plan, electric vehicle charging points, and that all gas-fired boiler installations should be to a specified standard. In conclusion, the site is allocated as a strategic housing site in the Borough Plan and will provide housing and other social and leisure facilities. The potential impacts of the development in relation to residential amenity, visual amenity, highway safety, flood risk and drainage, contamination, air quality and ecology have all been considered. The assessment has subsequently shown there will be no adverse impacts in some instances. Where there are potential adverse impacts, it would be possible to mitigate these through the use of conditions. The recommendation is therefore approval, subject to conditions, as detailed on the agenda and addendum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for reading all that out for us. We've now got several speakers. Two of them are in the form of statements from objectors. So I'll hand over to Mr. Richardson, who will do the first one, which I believe is Mr. Gamblin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a statement from Mr. Gambling. He says, I strongly urge the committee to ensure that this development is fully safe and accessible to people travelling by foot and cycle to avoid building in-car dependency, with all of the negative side effects associated through overuse of motor transport. Committee members should put themselves in the position of future estate residents and evaluate daily life without the use of a car, considering taking young children to infant or primary school over a mile away at present, how older children will access secondary school independently, and the ease of accessing wider connections via train. Current cycle facilities as planned have shortcomings which are best addressed before construction begins, where good quality facilities can be built in rather than retrofitted later at additional cost, disruption and with a risk to quality. For example, the plan connects to the off-road route through Attleborough Fields, itself a very isolated shared space, which leaves people trapped and suffers from poor lighting and visibility in places, not a welcoming nor attractive space, particularly when travelling alone during quieter hours and after dark. This should not be considered the primary route for cycling. Instead, high-quality provision should be established on Eastborough Way itself. The plan indicates a shared use space running south from the Attleborough Fields access to the Crow Hill roundabout. Eastborough Way itself is a key corridor that could benefit from high-quality, separated cycling provision. This development should create the first stage of that route, built to current best standards. It should continue that route to the junction with Townsend Drive, enabling good, safe and easy connections between the new developments and the industrial estate, with a mind to future expansion of a cycle route along Eastborough Way to the north and south. It is essential that the new development does not hinder the potential build of an important, high-quality, separated cycle route by occupying vital space alongside Eastborough Way. There's a lack of cycling provision around the north half of the estate, and the access road, Heart of England Way, has the potential to be busy, including with larger vehicles, e.g. buses, refuse vehicles, and as such, safe cycling provision should be enabled here. This will also improve access to the crematorium for the wider community if safe cycling and walking provision is also enabled on Eastborough Way. Estate roads themselves should be developed with a walking and cycling first design, allowing motor vehicle access as guest only, This should involve careful street design to ensure slow vehicle movements, ensuring it is not possible to travel at speeds beyond 20 miles per hour. It is essential that housing developments do not build in-car dependency to the detriment of the wider town through increasing congestion, especially around schools at school-run times. Do you wish me to finish, Jen? Which can already be chaotic, but also to those residing in the estate who do not have access to a car. The location of the estate is already detrimental to the same. The climate emergency as declared by both the Borough and County Councils requires that action is taken to urgently reduce emissions, of which transport is a major source. The design of this estate therefore must do all it can to ensure other options, walking, cycling and public transport, remain viable, even preferable to driving for local transport. This is not something that the development can do alone, of course. It requires a commitment for broader infrastructure beyond the site boundary. However, it must play its part in developing walking and cycling infrastructure to published best standards. And that's the statement, Chair.
Thank you very much for that one. We also have a second statement from Mr. Bateman as well from the Cycle Forum.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Bateman says as follows: traffic. It's the bane of our existence, particularly the early morning rush, which coincides with the school run. With more houses, naturally, comes more traffic, but we can reduce the effect of making it feel easy and safe to choose active travel instead of a car for short journeys and for the school run, mitigating some of that traffic increase. Routes for active travel users should also be natural and directed as detailed in LTN 1/20 guidance, and there are a number of areas for improvement on the site, such as active travel access at the northern part of the site by the sales complex, as well as at the southern western corner. The disjointed nature of the toucan is a problem, but the route towards the town centre drastically needs improving if anyone is expected to use it. The emergency access point on the Eastborough Way side needs to be made so active travel users have natural priority. Currently, it seems like a car could park in the way of what is a planned 3-metre cycleway. Although things like this aren't within the site boundaries, as the funding is associated, it's important they're detailed in advance. For the affordable housing in lots 312/315, a priority should be given to providing secure cycle storage, and the same for any other dwellings without sheds or garages. And thank you for taking the time to read my objection. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. We also have, on behalf of the applicant, Ms. Bo Waters, who represents Crest, Nicholson and Midlands. So if you'd like to make your statement, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. My name is Joanne Bowater, and I am the planning manager at Crest Nicholson. This site is allocated in the adopted local plan as a strategic housing site. Originally owned by Warwickshire County Council, outline planning permission for the development of 360 houses was granted 3 years ago in 2018. In 2019, an amendment to the outline permission was granted, adjusting the timing of the various off-site highway improvement works. Some further variations to the outline conditions were agreed by this committee a few months ago. The Reserve Matters application before you now was submitted in December of last year. It provides the layout, scale, appearance and landscaping details for the approved 360 dwellings, all of which are the new Crest Nicholson house types. As stated in the report, there are a mix of dwellings, both houses and maisonettes, and 90 of them are affordable and will go to a local registered provider. The affordable tenures are split between affordable rent and shared ownership. We have worked hard to ensure that the site layout and the house types adhere to the approved design brief and illustrative master plan for this site, whilst also meeting the relevant policy and design standards. Our negotiations with the planning officer have led to a series of detailed discussions and layout reviews on matters including affordable house clustering, proximity to trees and sustainable connectivity. The layout, the house types and the footpath and cycleway connections within and beyond the site will ensure that this is a high quality and sustainable scheme. In addition to the housing, almost 4 hectares of new public open space will be provided to the east of the site with new tree planting, grassed areas and wildflower meadows, The new footpaths and cycleways will connect into this new open space. If Reserve Matters approval is granted this evening, it would be our intention to commence development in the near future, triggering the payment of the agreed Section 106 obligations, which amounts to around £3 million. This includes £450,000 for bus service improvements and £400,000 for footpaths and cycleways. In conclusion, the proposed scheme has been subject to detailed negotiation and consultation, and your planning and other officers are satisfied that it is acceptable. We would urge you to support the officer recommendation to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bowater. Can I ask any members if they have any points of clarification they would like to ask Ms Bowater? Councillor Condicore.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just about the sustainable transport and the phasing, because obviously we've got a big issue about people, particularly females, walking and things. The shops to the south of the site, is the phasing going to ensure we've actually got a walking route through from when you start building? Because this is some of the developers sort of starting one side, and you end up not being connected to the shops until every part is built. Thank you.
We are looking at phasing now. It's part of a condition and needs to be discharged. I don't think it's possible to build the entire route all the way down to the shop straight away, because the northern part of the site is likely to be built first, but that's certainly a consideration that will be taken into account, and I can take back to the team when we're looking at how the site is built out and just thinking about those safe connections.
Thank you very much. Any other, so Councillor Hamsley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just, Ms Bowater, any thought for parking for guests and visitors been made?
Yes, I believe it has. I don't have the actual numbers here with me, but all of the parking standards have been adhered to in accordance with the policy guidance. So I don't have specific numbers, but yes, there will be sufficient.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other members wishing to ask any points of clarification, so I'll move to recommendation, which is to grant planning permission. Do I have somebody to propose that to be moved to the debate? Okay, I shall recommend in that case. Do I have a seconder? Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. Okay, do I have any councillors who wish to speak on this matter? Okay, Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I've got just one question for the officers, and then if you'd allow me to continue. In terms of the hedgerow along East Borough Way, is that down for removal? Because I couldn't be sure on the plans.
No, I don't believe so. There will be some removal in terms of to create the emergency access and things, but that's not part of the hedgerow that's going to be removed.
Okay, you had I think a follow-up point, Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to say, I'm a little disappointed in this application in terms of where the houses are situated. 6 of the 7 houses are affordable, are all on the edge of the site, which, you know, that's not pepper potting to me. That's leaving a whole middle part of the site exclusively for not rented accommodation, which concerns me. The distance standards within the residential amenity. For a new site, there's nothing on there. I would have thought a little bit more thought would have gone into ensuring the houses aren't overlooked. You know, they've got French windows in so people can see past them. I mean, it's a real blank canvas and a really good opportunity to make a really good housing estate. And I really don't think it fits my criteria for that at all. I am unhappy about how that the pepper potting hasn't been done. And in terms of only 119 houses out of 360 will be built so that they can be used for lifetime or used for adaptations. I don't know whether the officer knows how many of those that are in the affordable category fall into that 119. So if the officer could maybe find that out for me, that'd be useful. And it just doesn't sit right with me. I think it's badly designed, and at this moment in time, I will listen to the debate. I haven't made my mind up. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. This is in my ward, so it's only appropriate, I think, that I get a chance to comment. I've never really liked the principle of having development on this site, but it was put in there under the previous administration with the borough plan. It was passed by the inspector, and a previous planning committee before May, I think it was 2018, one of the officers said, actually passed the principle, the outline planning application for this site. So, regardless of whether we like it or not, the principle has been established that there will be development on this site. I don't see any way in which, if this committee was to, for example, turn it down, if it was to go to appeal, I think the inspector would quite quickly laugh us out of his office and cost us a six-figure sum into the bargain, which I don't think is in residents' interest for us to be paying that out at a time when we have significant amounts of money to find to balance the books in the next year. However, myself and Councillor Clark at the time, before the outline planning application was put together, we did work with the then owner of the site, the County Council, to make sure that there were improvements, particularly to the road network, so the island at Heart of England Way, and in particular the island down at Highfield Road, knowing that there is a whole system moving forward, not just on Eastborough Way, but down and through into Attleborough and out to the M6 beyond, because as I go to work every day, I quite often see heavy goods vehicles coming down from that from that end of town over Highfield Road and off on their merry way onto the M6. So we have managed to secure those improvements, which I think are vital to make sure that this application is sustainable. I actually disagree with Councillor Shepherd. I think that whilst the pepper potting isn't perfect, and try and saying that when you've had a few drinks in the evening, I think it's one of the better examples of pepper potting I've seen actually. Normally, I see pepper potting clustered together on a site like this at perhaps 3 sites rather than the 7 sites that we have here. And normally they will be clustered in the middle, away from the visual amenity aspects. So looking at this plan here, I can see a number of pepper potting sites which are close to green or open spaces, which I think actually makes a change from a planning developer where they normally cluster them away from some of the nicer aspects of the development. So looking at the screen share, you've got some which are close to the right hand side, which are close to the plain open spaces which are going to be created. You've got some towards the bottom in 2 sections which will overlook some of the fields down towards Eastborough Way. You've got some on the left hand side which will have a visual over towards the crematorium. I think that is actually better than some of the planning applications we have seen in the past, which I have been a vocal critic of. So I quite like that, and also the fact that we will get, as part of this development in Whitestone, an upgrade to our plain open spaces. The 2012 plain open space strategy, which whilst it is grossly out of date, it is still true in very few respects. And one of those respects it is true in, Chair, is that Whitestone is one of the most deprived in terms of plain open spaces. All you have in Whitestone is Crow Hill Rec, and you have a little one just around the corner. I can't remember, Inchford Close, I think it's off from memory. Everywhere else you can't get to in the whole Whitestone ward. The nearest you get is Paulsland, which is a significant distance away from where this is and other parts of Whitestone are. So I think it's actually welcome that if we are having this development, which I don't want, but I am determined to make sure, and have been throughout my time as a councillor for any development in Whitestone, that we managed to squeeze every last penny out of the developer to make improvements for the existing and future occupiers. So I will, to an extent, have to metaphorically hold my nose in voting for this chair, but I think it could have been a heck of a lot worse. It is no worse than any other estate that has been developed so far within this borough. I think it's probably better than some of the estates we've seen across the borough in some respects, particularly some of the piecemeal ones we've seen on the north of Nuneaton in Weddington and St Nick's. So I think it is an acceptable development that does the best job it can do under very difficult circumstances. So I will vote for it, because the alternative is we fork out over £100,000 on an argument we are almost certain to lose if we were to try that chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. It's a very valid point there. Councillor Concord, I believe you wanted to come in as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's actually quite often a third alternative, and we've turned down quite a few of the detailed planning applications just on a few distance standards or pepper potting, and the applicant has come back within a month or so with new applications, and then we've approved the second application. So as long as we're not turning it down as a matter of principle, but actually just suggesting that there's design defects, you can quite reasonably and without costs point out deficiencies. So there are refusals that effectively go back and do some adjustments, and quite often the previous chair said actually, yeah, this is actually a mostly reasonable design, but it's not crossed the line quite. So I think there are lots of areas where I personally would like some improvement, and also I think we need to be careful on conditions. I am very concerned on very large sites about them being built from one end, and effectively people are isolated, unable to safely walk or cycle to the local shops, and particularly the recent murders of women walking alone and things. I do want this to be built in a way that effectively, even if you build from the far end, you make sure there's actually a lit, safe walking route. So it's in the phasing plan, in terms of making it sustainable, and when people move on to this site, I would like it to be complete enough that it actually works as a safe environment from the first 50 houses. Some of the houses on Eastbourne Way, for example, there wasn't the hole in the hedge put in till the whole site was virtually built. Yeah, and it's these hole in hedges, and I don't know if we need to put a condition in or ask the officers for reserve matters stuff to actually really look out for the phasing in order to make it a safe design. The second thing that's gone wrong in lots of the new developments is just the affordable housing, how grotty the distances are, etc. So I would like the officers to confirm that the distance standard failures aren't predominantly in the affordable housing, because this is what tends to happen, is they tend to get designed last and have the least space, and this is where quite often the planners say, well, it's buyer beware. If you go and buy a new house, you look at the plan to make sure you're not too close to another one, whereas the people going into the affordable housing, they're not buyers, so they need actually better protection from the distance standards. So I'd like the assurance that all the affordable housing at least can be made to suitable distance standards. And on this sustainability, there are quite a few things that are good in here, but the only thing we do for energy efficiency is the passive solar gain, building the houses sensibly for the orientation. And I really notice the affordable houses are mostly north-south facing, and yeah, particularly the ones facing onto Eastbourne Way. I mean, I think the report's wrong, they're not north-east, south-west. Yeah, that is clearly a north-south grid, and the houses are facing due east, due west. And so I do fear that affordable housing is crammed small, with smaller windows, and if they're not orientated well, and they've got these distance standard issues. So I really think we should go back for a redesign, not a total throw out, but a tweak of the layouts and try and get a bit better distancing, a bit better solar gain. So I won't be voting for it, but if it is approved, I'm really keen that we make this as safe as possible. So I would ask for a condition about making sure all the routes are safe during the phasing is considered as always a safe walking route. And I would ask that we actually have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, because these sites are designed for 20 mile an hours. All the ones around Weddington, they put the chicanes in, they do the shaping, but no one actually says, let's make it 20. So legally, you can drive around these estates at ridiculous speeds, and then you hit the chicanes and the speed calming features. But I think we really do need, on a large site like this, to be thinking of safety, children playing in the streets, and actually making this as good a job as we can from where we are. So I'll be voting against on the details, but with a small changes, and I think we could make this better. And looking around our developments, if you go further up Eastborough Way, the one on the corner of Longshoe to Eastborough Way, they've set the houses back quite a long way from Eastborough Way, so the houses don't get the noise impact. And I think the houses, particularly affordable houses on Eastborough Way, might get quite a noise impact from being so close. So I would have preferred it to have a bigger green strip just on that edge. Thank you, Chair.
Right, in terms of the points Councillor Condacore made about phasing, there is a condition on the outline permission that details of phasing need to be submitted, and as the applicant mentioned, they will take those comments on board as part of that process. So that's something that will be dealt with under the outline permission. In terms of distance standards, the affordables are compliant. It's more the private housing which has some shortfalls, but even though there are shortfalls, as I mentioned in my presentation and it's in the agenda, there are mitigating circumstances to say they're acceptable. Plus, the SPD, on which covers distance standards, does state that they are to be used flexibly, they're not rigid and they're not set in stone. So you look at each case on its own merits. Councillor Condacore also mentioned noise impacts and development not being set back far enough from Eastborough Way. A noise assessment was carried out as part of the outline, and Environmental Health are happy with the layout as shown, which does generally accord with the master plan that was submitted as part of the outline permission. There are conditions on that outline which require details and the provision of a noise barrier along Eastborough Way and sufficient glazing and ventilation, particularly to those properties, which would be dealt with by a condition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Evans.
I just want to confirm I will not be supporting any condition that puts in place 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I don't support them, and if anyone can do above 20 on that estate, then I wish them all the best. You know, I can't see it happening myself.
Yeah, I think with this one, a lot of the devil is actually in the detail. And there's still some of that to emerge. But I mean, in terms of sort of the principles, I have to agree with Councillor Wilson. I think looking at it, this is one of the better ones that's probably come forward. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm hoping the developers will carry on working if it's passed tonight with the local planning department and hopefully with even residents groups as this nears those kind of stages to actually look at how some of these issues can be dealt with. So I kind of hope that will happen as we move forward. So if we have no other speakers, I'd like to move to the vote. So all those in favour? Okay, against? Any abstentions? No. Okay, thank you. So that recommendation then is moved. Can we move to our next item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Shall I continue? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. This application is a variation of condition application to a previous permission. Essentially, the previous permission was approved in March 2021. However, more substantial demolition took place than was originally approved. In order to regularise the situation, the applicant has applied to vary Condition 2 of the previous approval to allow development to be carried out in accordance with a different new plan. In this case, drawing number 108410 revision J instead of revision F, which was previously approved. The main difference being on the newly proposed plan, more of the house is shown as being demolished and more being rebuilt. The original property was a two-storey detached house with pitched roofs. It was built between 1928 and 1939 and was a typical traditional design of that era and this area. The site is surrounded by houses of varying types and designs and backs onto properties in Lem Close. The two key issues to consider are the impact on visual amenity and the impact on residential amenity. The proposal will be visible within the street scene of Lutterworth Road. The front elevation is set back from the footpath, consistent with its neighbouring houses. The design reflects the traditional style of the area and features a hipped roof with painted render finish. This replicates the overall style and size of that already previously approved. Here are the elevations. Members will note that the majority of the building will be new, so to speak, with only a small bit of the original dwelling remaining, and essentially that's the crux of why this application is being made. But these elevations are identical to those previously approved. The proposal property has two other houses either side, 94 Lutterworth Road to the southeast and 98 Lutterworth Road to the northwest. Number 9 Lem closer to the rear of the site. The proposal has been assessed against the adopted Sustainable Design and Construction SPD, and overall it is considered that there will be no unacceptable harm on residential amenity. The two key issues are visual amenity and residential amenity, and overall it is considered that there will be no unacceptable harm to either of these caused by the development. The recommendation is therefore one of approval, subject to conditions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Do I have somebody to propose? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Evans. Okay, so I'll now move to the discussion. Do I have any members who wish to speak on this item? No? Okay, in that case we'll move straight to the vote then. All those in favour of the recommendation? Unanimous? Yes, that's carried unanimously then. Oh, sorry, my apologies, Councillor Shepherd. Right, okay, quite right. Okay, thank you, Councillor Shepherd. So that is moved then, carried. Okay, so if we move on to item number 5.
This application is for a change of use to a residential caravan site for 3 Gypsy families with 2 caravans on each pitch. These would include no more than 1 static caravan and associated works and laying of hard standing. Objections have been received as detailed on the agenda, raising issues such as inappropriate development in the green belt, loss of openness in the green belt, loss of privacy, increased noise and impact on highway safety. In terms of the principle of development, policy DS3 of the Borough Plan states that development outside settlement boundaries is limited to agriculture, forestry, leisure and other uses that can be demonstrated to require a location outside of settlement boundary. This site is not within a defined settlement boundary as shown yellow on the plan green, and therefore it is not considered that the principle of the development is acceptable. The application site lies within the West Midlands Green Belt, where in line with paragraphs 147 and 149 of the NPPF, policy DS7 of the Borough Plan makes it clear that there is a general presumption against inappropriate development, which, by definition, is harmful to the green belt. Paragraph 150 of the NPPF sets out certain types of development which are acceptable within the green belt, with paragraph 149 stating that new buildings within the green belt are inappropriate, except in certain circumstances. The proposed change of use of the land to a residential caravan site does not fall with any of the exemptions outlined in these policies, and is therefore a form of inappropriate development. This inappropriateness is also reiterated in paragraph 16 of planning policy for travel sites. The development should therefore not be approved except in very special circumstances, and that substantial weight should be given to any harm to the green belt by reason of inappropriateness. In terms of the impact on the openness of the green belt, paragraph 137 of the NPPF states that the fundamental aim of green belt policy is to prevent urban sprawl by keeping land permanently open, and that the essential characteristics of green belts are their openness and permanence. The site is ultimately an open area of green space field bounded by mature hedging in part to the rear of the existing established residential rear private gardens of properties along Coventry Road. The area to the north of Coventry Road and to the southwest of the site is undeveloped and has a very open character. Officers consider that the loss of this open gap would have a detrimental impact on the openness of the green belt and would introduce permanent development. The surrounding land is predominantly open countryside, and the application site is contiguous with that part of the open green belt. The proposal would introduce development in an area which currently has an open field and therefore create significant harm to the openness of the green belt. Paragraph 138 of the NPPF sets out 5 purposes of including land in the green belt. These are to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, to prevent neighbouring towns from merging into one another, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns, and to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging the reuse of urban land. The site is identified in the Joint Greenbelt Study of 2015, which was commissioned as part of the Borough Plan as parcel BU2. The study found that this parcel performed well against most of the Greenbelt purposes and was considered a medium-performing Greenbelt parcel. Officers consider there is conflict with the first purpose, which is to check the unrestricted sprawl of built-up areas, as the proposal would lead to further development in the Greenbelt and would not contain developments to within the recognised settlement boundary. There is also conflict with the third purpose, which is to safeguard the countryside from encroachment. The site is currently open, as is the surrounding land to the east and southeast, and it is considered that the development would encroach into an open part of that green belt. In relation to the character and the visual amenity of the green belt, the site is located to the rear of properties fronting Coventry Road, which is of a uniformed linear formation. There are views of the site from Coventry Road, particularly through the gap between numbers 69 and 71. There are some trees and hedges along the north-east boundary, but they cannot be relied upon to screen development in perpetuity. Due to these views, there will be some impact on the character and visual amenity of the green belt, and the introduction of caravans, hard standing and boundary treatments will impact on the character and visual amenity of the green belt. Officers consider that the significant harm to the openness of the green belt and the moderate harm caused by conflict with 2 of the purposes add to the substantial harm by reason of inappropriateness, and is therefore in conflict with the NPPF and the Borough Plan. Paragraph 148 of the NPPF states that when considering any plan application, Local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the greenbelt. Very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the greenbelt, by reason of inappropriateness, and any other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. In this case, some considerations have been put forward by the agent, which they believe amount to very special circumstances which outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. These will be covered in turn next. The first is unmet need. Planning policy for traveller sites requires local authorities to consider the existing level of provision and need for sites, and that local authorities should identify and update annually a supply of specific deliverable sites sufficient to provide... Sorry. So as I was saying, local authorities are required to demonstrate a 5-year supply's worth of sites. The most recent Gypsy and Traveller and Accommodation assessment was completed in July 2016, which provides information about the current and future accommodation needs for Gypsies and Travellers. Policy DS4 of the Borough Plan outlines that at least 39 residential pitches and 5 transit pitches will be planned for and provided within the borough between 2011 and 2031. This application would contribute 3 permanent pitches towards this requirement. Since the publication of the assessment for Gypsies and Travellers, an additional 10 permanent residential pitches have been approved that were not accounted for in that assessment, leaving a further 29 permanent pitches to find. The Council has started work on a Gypsy and Travellers site allocations DPD. An issue and options draft is currently out for consultation. The document is at an early stage and does not allocate sites, but looks for broad locations for such sites and a number of pitches to provide for. To support this, the Council has commissioned an updated Gypsy Traveller Accommodation Assessment. This advises that the current and occupied and vacant pitches within the borough, there is a need for 16 additional pitches and no transit pitches to meet those who meet the definition of travellers. Therefore, this is a decrease of 23 residential pitches and 5 transits. However, no decision has been made by the Council whether to use these new figures, and those existing in the adopted borough plan should be used to make decisions on applications. Planning policy for traveller sites states that if a local planning authority cannot demonstrate an up-to-date 5-year supply of sites, there should be a significant material consideration in any subsequent planning decision when considering applications for temporary permission. However, it goes on to say that the exception to this is where the proposal is on land designated as greenbelt. Since the introduction of planning policy for traveller sites, appeal decisions relating to other Gypsies and traveller sites in the greenbelt have continued to give unmet need weight as part of the planning balance. Therefore, as there is a shortfall of current provision and the Council currently doesn't have a supply of deliverable sites, it is considered that it is a matter that weighs in favour of the application. However, also taking into account the Planning Policy for Traveller Sites document, it is considered that unmet need on its own is unlikely to outweigh the harm to the greenbelt to warrant granting permission. A lack of alternative sites has also been put forward. It is anticipated that the Gypsy and Traveller Site Allocations DPD will be adopted in February 2023. It could be argued that there is currently a policy vacuum in relation to the provision of such sites, which does weigh in favour of the application. The supporting statement submitted states that the Council has not identified any suitable sites in the Borough Plan, and the applicants do not have a lawful caravan site of their own, and this is the only site that is available to them. Confirmation from the agent has been requested as to where the intended occupants were living previously and whether number 69 Coventry Road is currently occupied, and why that property is not suitable for the intended occupants of the site. This information has not been submitted. The Gypsy Liaison Officer at the County Council has been consulted on the application, but no responses have been received. Compliance with policy H3 of the Borough Plan has also been put forward as another very special circumstance. Policy H3 is a criteria-based policy to be used in the determination of planning applications and identifying suitable sites. The application does comply with the requirements of that policy. The Gypsy status and personal circumstances of the intended occupants has also been put forward as a very special circumstance, and details of the intended occupants are outlined in the report on the agenda. Planning policy for traveller sites states that personal circumstances of the applicant should be considered by local authorities. The supporting statement submitted with the application states that the applicant, George Allen, makes his living as a ground worker, laying block paving and tarmac. He travels regularly to Scotland for work, which is usually a couple of months at a time each year, and he also attends horse fairs where he carries out some general business dealings. It is considered that they are gypsies and travellers, falling within the definition of such in planning policy for traveller sites. Jolene Smith's grandparents and uncle are dependents of the Allen family and therefore also fall within the definition of gypsies and travellers. In relation to health needs, the supporting statement puts forward that Dora Stanley has limited mobility following a knee replacement and relies on Jolene Smith for care, which can be best provided if they are living together in an extended family group. Elias Stanley Jr., who is Jolene Smith's uncle, has chronic kidney problems and also needs support from Jolene Smith and the family. Further information has been requested from the agent concerning details such as if the family are registered with local healthcare services and whether any of the occupants require regular healthcare, and if so, where this takes place. This information has not been submitted. Planning policy for traveller sites does state that personal circumstances are unlikely to clearly outweigh harm to the greenbelt and any other harm, so to establish very special circumstances. In terms of education needs, the supporting statement states that since being residents on the site, both Dora and Georgia Allen have been able to attend school in Wolvie. Further information has been requested as to whether the oldest child, who is 11, would be attending secondary school. Again, this information has not been received. Despite this, officers consider that this site would provide a settled base on which the children can access adequate healthcare, regular schooling, and maintain social relationships. It is considered that it would be in their best interests that they can continue to live at the site. Planning policy for traveller sites does refer to the best interests of the child, and it is considered that the needs of the children is a matter which weighs significantly in favour of the application. To sum up the greenbelt issue, the proposed development is a form of inappropriate development in the greenbelt. The development should therefore not be approved except in very special circumstances. Officers consider that the significant harm to the openness of the greenbelt and the moderate harm caused by conflict with two of the purposes adds to the substantial harm by reason of inappropriateness. Very special circumstances should be demonstrated to justify inappropriate development. In this respect, the very special circumstances are the unmet need for gypsy accommodation in the borough and the absence of alternative sites, compliance with policy H3 of the Borough Plan, and the personal circumstances of the intended occupants. There is an unmet need for such sites in the borough, but it is not considered that the unmet need on its own would outweigh the harm to the greenbelt to warrant granting planning permission. The compliance with policy H3 of the Borough Plan also does weigh in favour of the application. While some weight is attached to the health needs of the occupants, it is not considered that sufficient information has been submitted regarding whether the occupants require regular healthcare and where this is, and any reliance on local healthcare services. The educational needs of the children does weigh significantly in favour of the application. However, whilst the best interests of the children are a primary consideration, officers don't consider they are a determining factor. The cumulative weight of the supporting considerations do not outweigh the harm to the greenbelt, and therefore it is not considered that very special circumstances exist to allow this development in the greenbelt. Turning to residential amenity, the rear of numbers 71 to 77 Coventry Road are the closest properties to the site. A static caravan is proposed to the western part of the site, which would be sited approximately 30 metres away, which does comply with distance standards. It is therefore not considered that there will be any significant overlooking from and to the site. Environmental Health have been consulted but have not responded. However, they had no objections in relation to the impact on surrounding properties to the previous application, which was for the creation of 3 residential units. They also stated that as the site is approximately 250 metres from the railway and set well back from the road, they were not concerned about noise impacting the site. In relation to visual amenity, the NPPF states that planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments are sympathetic to local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape setting. Policy B3 of the Borough Plan states that all development proposals must contribute to local distinctiveness and character. The site is located to the rear of properties fronting Coventry Road, which is currently of a uniform linear formation, which would be considered ribbon development. The caravan site will be located to the rear of the properties and therefore constitute backland development. Officers consider that the proposed development would depart from the existing characteristics of the area, street scene and built form, contrary to the visual amenities of the area. In terms of highway safety, the NPPF states that it should be ensured that safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved. Access is proposed off Coventry Road between numbers 69 and 71. County highways have no objection, subject to conditions. In relation to flooding, the site is within flood zone 1, which has the lowest possibility of flooding, and drainage details could be secured through a condition. In terms of archaeology, it would appear that the proposal may have an impact upon a small area of ridge and furrow. However, this is a small part of what itself is a relatively small and isolated fragment of ridge and furrow. Welsh County Council Archaeology have been consulted and stated that some of the hard standing that was previously laid would have had some impact on the surviving earthworks. However, there is very little in terms of what is known about the archaeological sites and the surrounding area, and this proposal is unlikely to have significant impacts, and therefore they have no objection. In conclusion, the proposed development is a form of inappropriate development in the greenbelt. Development should therefore not be approved in very special circumstances. It is considered that the significant harm to the openness of the greenbelt and the moderate harm of conflict caused by the conflict of two other purposes add to the substantial harm by reason of inappropriateness. Very special circumstances should be demonstrated to justify the inappropriate development. In this respect, the very special circumstances are unmet need, lack of accommodation, compliance with policy, and the personal circumstances of the occupants. The cumulative weight of the supporting considerations do not outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. It is therefore not considered that very special circumstances exist to allow development in the greenbelt. In addition, the site is outside a recognised settlement boundary and will depart from the existing linear form of development. The recommendation is therefore refusal as detailed on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Smith, I know you can't participate in this, so I believe you want to say something first as an objector, and then I'll move to Riley Smith, who's the agent for Philip Brown Associates. Sorry. Oh, sorry, my apologies. I was told it'd be Riley Smith, but that's fine. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak and then I shall leave the chamber. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that there's a presumption against inappropriate development in the Greenbelt unless there are very special circumstances. This application presents no special circumstances sufficient to make the change of use to a residential site for 3 gypsy families with 2 caravans each acceptable. This piece of open countryside has been enjoyed by the houses that back onto it for many decades, and the harm already caused by the sighting of caravans, associated vehicles, the laying of gravel and hard standing and dumping of waste without planning permission has been a source of much distress and heartache to the residents that look onto it. A recent application to site caravans in this field has already been refused, and there is already an enforcement notice served on the applicants for the siting of caravans without planning permission, which is currently under appeal. On page 77, under the heading Alternative Sites, the applicants have claimed they have nowhere else to live if this site is not approved. I believe this statement to be untrue. The land was bought as part of a parcel with the house at number 69, which is still listed as being owned by the applicant. The wider family also own gypsy sites in the area, and the current occupiers of this land were moved from these local sites to occupy the site as it is. And I think that was for the sole purpose of occupying the land. As the applicant is the owner of house at number 69 and his wider family do own caravan sites in the area, I failed to see how they can receive any special consideration as such in support of this application on the basis of lack of alternative accommodation sites. There was an extremely high number of objections to this application, totaling 100 from 79 different properties, which demonstrates the very high level of feeling against this application from Bulkington residents. And I would ask that the committee support the officer recommendation and refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. We'll now hear from the agent, Mr. Philip Brown, from Philip Brown Associates. So you're aware you've got 3 minutes, Mr. Brown. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The site accommodates Jolene and George Allen, who don't incidentally own number 69 Coventry Road, and their 2 school-aged children. It would also accommodate 2 pensioners in their 80s who are disabled and need help and support from Jolene, and Jolene's uncle who needs a kidney transplant and who also suffers from chronic asthma, often resulting in hospitalisation. Quite clearly, the ones with chronic health problems are in need of regular and consistent health care, and if not in this area, then where? None of them have any alternative site to go to. They're Romany gypsies who've always lived in caravans and cannot move into bricks and mortar accommodation. Most existing gypsy sites in this borough are in the Greenbelt, and the council itself has approved gypsy sites in the Greenbelt in recognition that there are few, if any, alternatives likely to be available. Despite a requirement in government policy to allocate land for gypsy sites in a development plan document, this council has not done so, cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable sites, and have no current proposals to remedy the situation. The Issues and Options draft doesn't propose any allocations, and the emerging DPD will not be found sound until it does allocate sufficient land to meet the identified need. The council, as a result, is currently in a very weak position for any future appeals. You've got a significant unmet need, no alternative sites, and the development plan doesn't allocate land to satisfy the identified need. Council officers agree that the application site satisfies your criteria in policy H3 for consideration of proposals for gypsy sites. the development wouldn't have any adverse impact on the amenities of any local residents. And the site is virtually hidden from public view. Clearly doesn't have any impact on the character and appearance of the wider landscape. You can't even see the development. Until such time as the council brings forward viable alternatives through its DPD, it does not make any sense to make my clients homeless in the meantime. Surely it's better to grant at least a temporary planning permission for perhaps 3 years to allow suitable alternatives to be brought forward. This would allow the site residents continued access to education and health services on which they rely. There are 2 children on site, and their needs must be at the forefront of your thoughts when making your decision. Their needs cannot be given less intrinsic weight than any other material consideration. That includes the substantial weight to be given to harm to the greenbelt. And in this case, it's clearly, and your officers agree, it's in their best interests to stay where they are, and that will be the case until you have a Gypsy and Traveller DPD.
Sorry, Mr. Brown,
and
you've
put
got
forward
3 minutes. Can we
alternative
summarise any last points, please?
Well, just to summarise, what the council officer doesn't include in the considerations that you have to take into account are the needs of the children. It's not just personal circumstances. There's a human rights issue, and it's the needs of the children that needs to be taken into account, and the needs of vulnerable adults. Until such time as they've got somewhere else to go, then give them a temporary planning permission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. I have to hold you there. Thank you. Do I have any points for clarification, Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Brown, is it? Yes. Philip Brown. Could I ask, could you expand, what do you mean by temporary planning permission in the context of this application? It's not a term I'm aware of, but temporary planning permission. Never heard of that before.
Well, I'm very surprised that you haven't. It means that you could impose a condition on the planning permission that limits the duration of the permission to a period of 3 years, so that at the end of that 3 years the planning permission would end, and the applicants would have to vacate the site unless a further planning permission were granted. In that 3 years, your council can look at this site amongst any others that come forward for Gypsy sites in the borough and consider whether this site is suitable for allocation. You've already heard from your council officers that the site accords with your own policy H3. So it's one of the sites, in fact, that you're going to have to look at when you consider how you're going to meet accommodation needs in this borough. Why close the door to that now when you can give yourself the opportunity to consider it as part of the DPD process?
Okay, Councillor Evans, any further points or questions? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, sir, I don't know who you are. I know you're not pardon? Right, I'm sorry, because you're not a member of the committee, I can't take any questions. This is clarification for... No, this is for members of the committee if they want any points of clarification from the speaker. So, although you may be allowed to speak on the item, and I haven't got you down actually. Sorry, what's your name? Sorry, your name is... No, what's your name, sir? Oh, sorry, you are on my list. We'll come to you in a minute. We're just dealing with points of clarification from the members of the committee. So, no, that's okay. Do I have any other committee members? Yeah, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. You state that there are, in your view, extenuating special circumstances which would outweigh the MPPS presumption of being against backland development and protecting the greenbelt, yet your clients, according to the officer's presentation, failed to present documentation to back up their claims. Are you able to provide an explanation as to why they have failed to do so?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I've never been asked for clarification in the form of documentary evidence, and it wouldn't be usual to provide personal information, particularly about the needs of children, to a public forum, which is the planning application process. We have given considerable amount of information about the family's needs, but going beyond that would be there are privacy issues at stake, which and I don't believe that the information that's being requested is really necessary.
Okay.
Beyond what's already been provided.
Yeah, just one thing that I think with officers, we need to get clarification on that point. So if we could look into that, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just clarify that information was requested from the agent, Mr. Brown, a number of weeks ago on the application, mainly to do with further information about the health needs of the occupants and the education needs of the children, and that wasn't forthcoming. It isn't unusual to ask for information such as that for us to assess the application, and if it does contain sensitive information, we would then normally present that to committee as a confidential item. That has been done previously on other applications similar to what's before you tonight.
Councillor, you have another point you wish to make?
Thank you. It's a follow-up to the answer, and I thank the officers for their clarification. If your central argument is about special circumstances, how do you expect to be able to prove in a quasi-judicial function, which is what the planning committee is, that your special circumstances outweigh the harm to the green belt? Surely it is not unreasonable, and there are no human rights issues on this about providing evidence, because we've already heard from officers it can be dealt with in a confidential item. So why should we just take your word for it without having documentary evidence? Otherwise, I could claim I have all those issues and put in a planning application and expect the same treatment.
Of course, the argument on very special circumstances isn't just one issue. It's not just personal circumstances and needs of the children. There's unmet need, lack of alternatives, lack of a 5-year supply, failure of the development plan, being in accordance with policy H3 of your development plan. So it isn't just one factor that comes into play with very special circumstances. Personal circumstances is one element of that. The report to committee clearly sets out the personal circumstances as far as they are relevant to this application. I've given you details, I've given the council details of the health problems. Quite what more information they would want beyond what they've already reported, I can't really see that it would help. And what hasn't been properly considered, and what you have to consider, are the needs of the children on top of everything else. You know that there are children on the site. You know that they're in education locally, and you know from your officers that it is in their best interests to stay where they are.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, does that answer your points and questions? No, but you will accept what you've heard. Okay. Do I have any other councillors that wish to clarify before I move on to Mr. Smith? No. So, Mr. Smith, yeah, you have to press the big button.
That one? Oh, thank you very much for listening to me. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Smith, who just went out, he implied to this full place as we've got other gypsy caravan sites. There's one thing I would like him to ask, if any members here could, to prove or show in whatever as we own gypsy sites. We don't own gypsy sites. I own building land on 175 Coventry Road, as all the councillors know. I build houses. I've built there. That is my daughter's place, and I've helped her to try to get it. The old age pension was on there. If there was a licence for 2 years, say, that would give me time to... I'm the oldest of the family now, right? My wife is her daughter, and she's got a son, not very well in life, who's had 2 transplants already. I can prove that in... I'll answer you if I could. I can prove that in black and white from Oxford Hospital, right? I can give you papers. All as we want, for the time being, if it could just be a trial licence for about 2 years, well, I've already been in these council offices asking about if they could find them bungalows in the village, you know, what the council use, or something like that. But at the minute, my hands is tied in life. And that is why they're with my daughter at the minute on that property. My sister-in-law on the end, my brother died, and that was his wife. I'm the oldest of the family still alive, thank God. I'm trying to look after my family the best I can. I know, listen, I'm a travelling man, been travelled all my life. I'm not a new age gypsy what pulls on the grounds around here and goes down the edge to the toilet. I'm not like that. I've been brought up with respect in my life. And all as I want to do in life is try to out my daughter and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law out at the minute. But if you need, if this could be put on hold for 24 hours, in 24 hours I can have paperwork showing the special needs for these people who's here. My daughter-in-law has got a job, my sister-in-law, sorry, has got a job to walk, Chairman. And I can prove it. She's under Nuneaton Hospital at the minute. She might have to have a foot off. And I can prove all this. It's not hearsay. I can prove it in black and white. I can't read and write, as well, a lot of councillors know I can't. But I can prove what I'm saying now, and also I can prove was that I don't, or none of my family, own gypsy sites nowhere. We don't own gypsy sites. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. But if, as I say, if the council want proof for my family there, I can get proof from Oxford. He's had 2 kidney transplants. He's under the weather now. He's not very well. He's living with my daughter and mother-in-law there and my sister-in-law on the site. Thank you very much, Chairman, for listening.
Thank you. If you turn off your microphone, thank you, lovely. Is there any councillors like to come back on a points for clarification? No, I have one point. You said that you were looking for sort of potentially bungalows for your family and within the village. Can I ask, have you made any applications for social housing within the borough?
I come into the council office 2 days ago. They've given me forms to fill in, and I've got to fill forms in because if they do get turned off, then, you know, I've got to try and get something in line for them. But another thing is, if we go to an appeal, like if it gets failed tonight, if we go to an appeal, the appeal could take 12 to 15 months anyway to come, couldn't it? So, you know. I don't want to say.
Thank you. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick question about your proposal about a 2-year trial. During that period, if you were awarded temporary planning permission, during that time, would you plant the trees to do the screening, and would you be able to remove any waste from the site?
Sorry, Mr. Smith, can you just turn your microphone on, please?
Sorry. I can make sure as you won't see a cow on there. Sorry?
Yeah, thank you. And on the issue of waste on the site, because obviously that's...
Sorry, every Thursday the council come and pick the dustbins up.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all our speakers. I don't think there's any other points of clarification. So the motion in front of us is to refuse planning permission for reasons as printed. For the purposes of debate, do I have somebody to move that? So thank you, Councillor Wilson. Do I have a seconder for that? So, okay, thank you, Councillor Markham. Okay. So do I have any councillors who wish to speak on this item now? So start with you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've sat here too many times with Gypsy and planning applications, so I don't believe that temporary permission is the answer. We have seen this too many times where temporary permission has been granted for 2, 3, whatever years, and whatever happens, despite the best undertakings of whoever is sat there as the applicant, come like the month after, it's still there, and they haven't returned the land to the previous state. And then we end up going through the whole rigmarole again of extending the planning application or appealing and everything. So for me, it's all or bust. We either consider the application as it is, we either approve or reject, because to be honest, the temporary thing just delays the inevitable really and gives people false hope. So I have to consider the substantive application in my view, which is all or nothing. Now, I am disappointed by the fact that evidence wasn't provided. If I went to court to prove my case about something, and I didn't supply evidence to back up my case on time or in accordance with court orders, it would be thrown out. Regardless of the merits of my case, unless I'd actually done something to repair the damage I'd done, it would be thrown out. One of the fundamental things for me is equality before the law, Chair. Now, all things being equal, if I had the same medical conditions as these people do, and I have every sympathy for them, if they are suffering, I don't doubt that they have these, but if I had the same medical conditions and I'm a member of the settled community, if I applied to build a house on that land, would it be granted? The answer would be no. And for me, I believe residents, if they are to have faith in the planning system, must believe it applies fairly to everyone. So I think that the greenbelt, we have seen a tremendous amount of greenbelt being eroded in our borough over the past 2 or 3 years, and I don't believe that there are special circumstances which have been proved to my satisfaction, especially in the absence of evidence which, if officers have said they have asked for it, I believe that they have said that they have asked for it, and if it hasn't been provided, that says something to me about the faith of the applicant or their representative in not providing that information, if that is a central tenet of their actual argument for applying. So if I was to put an application on there, the answer would be no. And I think the officers they have to put a recommendation before us which they think they could substantiate at appeal. I think that would always be an officer's thoughts. Am I putting before the committee something which I could back up at appeal if I'm pushed? If they have gone out on a limb to say they would refuse the planning applications, I've seen plenty of applications where they have recommended approval in such circumstances, and I think that holds significant weight in my determination that they have actually put a recommendation of refusal, and that in their professional opinion, they don't believe the standards have been met. Now, we have a right as a committee to go against that. That's what the committee is here for. It is ultimately our decision. But I have to recognise the professional opinions which go behind these reports. So I will be backing the recommendation to refuse planning permission, Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillors. Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Conticol.
Thank you, Chair. I was trying to get to the bottom of the waste on the site issue, because the Councillor Smith said there'd been waste dumped on the site, so it'd be useful to know if the officers have got any information on that. And also, I was interested in the objection from the Rugby Borough Council, because this is very close to the boundary, so I was interested in knowing what the substance of that objection was. Thank you, Chair. If I can come back after those answers.
Yeah, can you provide any substance to Rugby Councils and waste? Thank you.
In terms of the waste issue, I think this is an ongoing situation with waste being dumped on the site. That's not just refuse, general refuse that's collected on a weekly basis. And that has been investigated by our enforcement team and environmental health, and I believe the Environment Agency. In terms of the objection from Rugby, that's on the basis that it's inappropriate development in the green belt with no very special circumstances demonstrated. Thank you.
Councillor Scott, you wish to follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Given those answers, I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Okay, do I have any other councillors, members? Okay, so I will admit then I am the other ward councillor for Bulkington, so you've seen Councillor Smith who's left. I haven't been involved in the same way that Councillor Smith has been involved because I'm a very newly elected member on this, but I am a resident of Bulkington and I have been sort of seeing what's been going on there. My issue though is to sort of limit myself to the planning side of this and not to sort of think about what's been going on. He said this and they've said that. So I'm going to try and stick to the points as I see it. And the points as I see it is that I am first of all not without sympathy to the plight of any of the residents, particularly people who've got ailments. I understand that, and I can understand where you're coming from. You know, I've been in a similar situation with family members myself over the years, and I get that completely. However, I am struggling to get my head around the fact that things have been asked for and they haven't been provided in terms of notifications from sort of the doctors, etc., on these issues. And I would have thought that would have been a fairly easy and straightforward ask to supply that information to the council. And as Councillor Wilson said, I think, you know, if you come to court and you've been asked for something, then you really should bring it and supply the evidence to back up and strengthen your application. So I don't believe actually at the moment, we could say there are any special circumstances. I do know this is, you know, we have a very well established linear sort of development there on Coventry Road, and what you're doing is you're kind of going onto that greenbelt land as non-linear development. What you've built there is completely out of character with the rest of the development. It really does not fit in from what I can see, and I kind of drive past it every day on my way to work, and I can sort of look down there from the main road and see what's going on. So I think in terms of, you know, you've built these properties, whether you've got planning permission or not, I'm not going to consider because that's not something that's kind of in front of me tonight from previous meetings that have been held. But in terms of that, and the fact you've built on this green belt, I'm struggling again to sort of, you know, justify what's happened, because I don't believe there's special circumstances that exist or have been proven satisfactorily at the moment. So because of that, I will not be able to support this application tonight, and will be moving to refuse it as well. So I'm assuming we've got no other councillors that wish to speak on this matter. So can we move to the vote? So all those in favour of refusing planning permission? So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. I don't know if there's anyone who's here specifically for this item. If you wish to leave, you are free to leave. You sort of don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting. I'm sorry, if there is no sort of come back through this meeting.
So, I do understand that's over, I do understand that. But could you tell me, please, when you were just on about the property on building down Coventry Road, when you said like planning permission, I got past full planning permission 3 years ago for that land where I'm building the houses. Didn't you realise that?
Mr. Smith, I'm not at liberty, because we've finished the item now, so I'm not at liberty to discuss further, but if you put things in writing to the council, if you're not happy with anything, or if you want to go to appeal, you're more than welcome to do so. It's your prerogative. So I'm sorry, I'm not discussing this item any further, Mr. Smith. Just give it a moment for anyone who's leaving. just wait for Dan to clean up the computer then. So, okay, take time, please. And then we'll move to item number 6.
Thank you, Chair. This application is a full application for the erection of a new pavilion at Ambleside Leisure Association on Ambleside Way, Nuneaton. The site is part of Ambleside Leisure, located on Ambleside Way. It is surrounded by housing on 3 sides, with Ambleside Way and Windermere Avenue comprising the south, west and northern boundaries. To some of the west there are also allotments which separate the site from the residential gardens. The pavilion is to be located on land to the north of the main buildings of Ambleside Leisure, near to the existing pitches, facing towards the west to overlook these sports pitches. The land is currently used partially as a pitch for the under-5s football training. The key issues here are the principle of the development, the impact on visual amenity, the impact on residential amenity, and the impact on highway safety. The proposal is to site the pavilion on the existing Ambleside Leisure site. It will face towards the nearby pitches. Sport England originally objected and asked for plans to demonstrate that the small junior pitches could still be accommodated even with the pavilion on site. The plans were amended to show that they could be. Sport England then removed their objection, subject to a condition. The design is to be a relatively modern one, with large timber cladding to the exterior. The size of the structure will mean a slightly higher ridgeline, but this is not out of character for the area. The siting is to the rear, northern part of the site, which is not readily visible within the street scenes of Ambleside Way or Windermere Avenue. The siting and design are considered to have an acceptable impact on the visual amenity of the area. The pavilion is to be sited around 40 metres from the nearest residential garden. Because of this siting away from gardens, there are no concerns over the loss of light or privacy with the pavilion being set so far away. There are some roof light windows in the rear roof slope, but again this will meet with distance standards given the distances involved. Environmental Health have requested a condition to prevent amplified sound, which will be added to any approval and is on the agenda. The Highways Authority have no objections over highway safety. This no objection was subject to a condition relating to the provision of 5 additional car parking spaces on the site. The site is a very large site and can easily accommodate 5 additional spaces. They have been shown indicatively on this plan, but the condition will be added to ensure that they are in place prior to the use of the pavilion. In conclusion, the proposal is recommended for approval, subject to conditions set out on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have one speaker on this item, that's Councillor Tromans, I believe. Oh, sorry, my apologies, and Mr. Carr. I think it's conventional that we go with you. You're indicated with you first, Councillor Tromans, then we'll go to Mr. Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm speaking as ward councillor, not as an objector or as a supporter, but as just reflecting the comments that I've had from both the applicant and also the residents. Ambleside is a very valuable amenity in Nuneaton and across the whole borough. They get users from everywhere, in Bedworth, Bulkington and Nuneaton. In our area, with all the expansion that we're having with the new homes, it's very, very needed. I can well understand that they want to improve the amenities there. And the design of the pavilion itself seems to be, very modest and in keeping, and has been deliberately done so that it won't cause problems to the local residents. And I'm glad that Ambleside are considering these things. I would ask members to look at page 89 or at the boards up there, and you can see in red the pavilion itself, which looks relatively small, and indeed it would be coming on for 40 metres between there and the houses that you can see to the top right there and coming round are Windermere. They are the odd numbers, typically, in fact they're all bungalows from numbers 30 odd to numbers 50 odd. But actually, if you look at that diagonal line that's to the right of the red, pavilion there. That's at the beginning of a dip down, and there's a hedge down that little slope down. And so if you stand in the field that's round, the area that's round that red proposed pavilion, towards where that diagonal line is, you're actually much more like 20 metres or less from people's end of people's back gardens. And indeed, on a site visit I did out there, I happened to see an elderly lady in her back garden of her bungalow, and I said in a voice no louder than this, "Hello," and just waved, and she looked up and waved back. And that gives you an impression of just how much the sound could impact on the elderly, typically elderly residents that live in the bungalows all round there. So I'm very pleased about the condition in terms of the amplified sound, but also I would ask for another condition to be added, one in respect of the normal close boarding 2.4 metre acoustic fencing that would go approximately along that diagonal line. That would not only shield the residents from seeing the kids running around in there in the evenings, but also significantly reduce the amount of sound, because it's not just from the building itself. The applicant's been very clear to officers what it's going to be used for in terms of youth clubs and all the rest of it, and that the hours of operation will be relatively late, and that would meaningfully impact on the peaceful enjoyment of the residents that back onto it. So by putting a condition in for that acoustic fencing, just the length of the, where it backs onto people's houses, so just along that diagonal line there, as far as it needs to go, I think we would have the best of both worlds. We're going to have an improved amenity there at Ambleside, which is very, very welcome, and I think we would also be doing right by the residents, and they would be being good neighbours by putting up the acoustic boarding, the other side of which there'll be a bit of a hedge just down the slope, so that will break up the impact of the boarding. So actually it will look quite nice from residents' back gardens, and they won't be disturbed by direct noise that's hitting them that in some places isn't really any further apart than the width of this room. So thank you, that's all I wanted to say, Chair.
Okay, anyone want any points of clarification? Any points? No. I will come back, Councillor Trones, when we move to the main debate regarding looking at your condition that you've asked for. So I will deal with that then, if that's okay. And I shall let our other speaker go next.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated.
Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I've been asked by the residents in the cul-de-sac of St Windermere to speak on their behalf this evening. I would like to make a point, Mr. Chairman, that until I read it in the Coventry Telegraph, the people that had objected to this application had no idea that this meeting was taking place this evening, and many of them do not use the internet and web pages. I would have thought it was best practice if the planning department had written to these objectors advising them by letter that this meeting was taking place today. Thank you on that point, Chair. The cul-de-sac, as you see there, is, with one exception, bungalows, occupied by senior citizens, some of them 80 years plus, some of them 90 years plus. And the residents are not against providing services for the people of the area. But in our estimation, Chair, this building is in the wrong place on a huge site that Ambleside represents. I also feel that the word pavilion can be misleading. It's a function room, Chair. It's a room that anyone can hire at any time of the year, any time of the day. And with the money that they are making, it's the residents of that cul-de-sac that are going to lose their quality of life because Ambleside are making money out of a function room. The residents enjoy a quality of life in their gardens, overlooking a very small allotment pitch, by the way. It's only one pitch wide, before you're into this developed area. And there's no doubt about it in all our minds that if this pavilion stroke function room was built, that in the springtime and the summertime, their quality of life would be reduced, impacted by noise pollution. If you add to that the fact that the all-weather pitch is part of the plan, this means that that function room and the pitch could be in use for 365 days of the year, Chair. And that is just unbelievably bad for the residents of the Close. If this application is passed, I would also echo the statements made by the councillor that soundproofing along that diagonal line should be part of the planning conditions, and that obviously the building itself should have soundproofing to the highest standard. Because once this goes ahead and problems occur, we've got a hell of a job coming back to you people to get things amended. In conclusion then, Chair, the building is a source of income to Ambleside, and the residents of that close, in fact, are the people that are going to be paying for it. And they will be paying for it with their reduced quality of life. And at 80 years, 90 years, I think it is inappropriate to pass this application, and I ask the committee to refuse application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Craig.
Thank you. I will take questions if anyone asks questions.
Does anyone have any points for clarification at all? Councillor Condark, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the visual amenity, obviously a big acoustic fence will also have a big visual impact. Have you any comments on sort of how much that would be? Because obviously you don't want the sound, but how high can residents around you see in terms of the fence? Because 2.4 metres sounded quite high to keep the noise of children who tend not to be 2.4 metres high.
Thank you, Chair. The hedge that is there already is just about 2.5 metres high. So the additional acoustic fencing would not be seen from the rest. The roof line of this pavilion is high, and it would be in people's vision from those bungalows. So the building itself is a high building. The acoustic boarding would not be an issue.
Sorry, Councillor Phillips.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, can you estimate how many people would be actually holding or using this function room?
Well, I can only talk hypothetically, if you like, Councillor. The room is a large function room. It's not a pavilion. And if it's there as a revenue source for the club, if you come along and ask, can I have a 21st birthday or an engagement or anything, and pay you for that room, they will hire it out for you. And that is my concern. And add to that then, during the daytime at the weekends, the all-weather football pitch that is going to be part of the plan, that means it's 365 days of the year potential noise pollution for the people, and I back right onto that pavilion, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Pandahar.
Thank you, Chair. Although we have a condition number 5, which they said no amplified sound equipment will be used, but I don't think anybody going to hire the function hall without having this type of system. So they're not just going to sit down, and they might have something musical system there placed. Thank you.
Can I just ask officers on that? And I think Councillor Pandahar has made a really good point there. How enforceable is that? Where it says no amplified sound equipment, including voice, music, and other amplified sound.
Yeah, I think it's very enforceable. We've had conditions like that elsewhere. There's obviously also the statutory noise nuisance legislation that comes into it if there is a noise nuisance. But in terms of the planning legislation, I think this condition is very enforceable, Chair. Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Pandahar?
Sorry, I couldn't understand, but I'm saying that they're not going to use any sound system in that room when they're going to hire.
No, I think the point is it's enforceable that if somebody does, then something can be done about it to stop and put conditions on to stop it being used for those purposes is what we're sort of saying here.
I don't know if it will be practical.
Councillor Hammersley.
Is it not a planning procedure to, if there are noises, that the building itself is soundproofed to contain any noises of such parties or joviality, we'll call it?
I think we're getting off the main point because we haven't actually made the decision yet to vote on this. We need to actually move to the discussion first. I think it's just points of clarification it was initially what we were going through. So I'm happy to come to that, but I think that needs to come in the discussion elements. So if there are no further questions, can I sort of ask, is there anyone who's happy to propose this motion? Okay, so thank you, Councillor Conticourt, and second, Councillor Smith. So we'll now move to the discussion. Councillor Smith, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Before I go into my comments, I'd like to ask a question of the officers, because I think Councillor Tromans raises a valid point about the noise protection that could be offered. Would that, as I have seen other sports facilities of a similar size and scale have such noise fencing, as it were, would that be a reasonable condition we could attach as a committee?
Thanks, Chair. So it sort of touches on what Councillor Hammersley was beginning to mention as well. We've consulted with Environmental Health, and they are the experts on noise that we consult with. They deemed that this condition preventing amplified noise was sufficient to prevent any harm to nearby receptors of that noise. So there's to be no additional intensive sound insulation to the structure, and at the moment there's nothing proposed on the boundary, and that was in line with what Environmental Health requested because of the lack of amplification. If we did put a condition on about close border fence, I don't think it's an appeal risk. I think it's probably something we could do. One thing I would say is that they are a charity, and we don't want to overburden them with these sort of restrictions. But obviously, if members are minded to, then I don't think it's an appeal risk to put that condition on. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Given that it is going to be used for social purposes, there would be presumably people, even if there's not amplified sound outside, who would go outside, have a smoke, have a drink or whatever, and given the nature of the lay of the land, sound like that will travel, and we're introducing more people into an area of this piece of land which isn't traditionally used, as I understand it, up there. So you're putting more people into that corner where they be playing sports or socialising, so there would be more sound travel. So I can understand why Environmental Health haven't necessarily flagged it, but I don't think they've necessarily accounted for the additional people that will be in that area. So I think it is a reasonable condition. So I would move an amendment to add a condition about that, Chair. I think, and it's good to see Mr. Carr back on the benches. It's been some time since I've seen him on the benches in his former guise as a councillor, but it's almost as if he's never been away, given the eloquence of his representations. But I think there's no reason in planning legislation to refuse it, and I think we also have to be cognizant as a committee that given the sheer amount of development which has happened in this particular area, additional amenities are going to be needed. You can always argue what they're going to be, but I think Ambleside, whether you like it or not, is going to be a key part of the amenities moving forward for the 6,000 odd houses which are going up on Weddington and St Nicholas. So I think we have to bear that in mind. And I think if we are also looking at, and I think I was going to say Councillor Carr, Mr Carr, goes to show how long I've sat on these benches too, that he has a point about future-proofing, that if it is difficult to come back to committees to deal with these sorts of things. Enforcement, whilst I accept it is possible, can be a tricky avenue to pursue. So I think we do have a right as a committee to ask for this additional insurance for the local residents. And if the Ambleside Association are going to be hiring this out, then there will be an income, as Mr. Carr has highlighted. So I think it would be an investment in their future if they were to not contest the soundproofing. So I would move that as an amendment, Chair, and I think it's probably something which I appreciate the residents immediately around there aren't going to 100% like it, but I think it is something that we can do to mitigate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that to second, Councillor Smith? Yeah. Okay, so that's... Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with everything Councillor Wilson said. This is a really important facility in this borough, well used, well respected and well run. However, I live next to Western Hall, similar problems with amplified sound. Those are pretty much accepted, but by far the bigger nuisance we get is the noise coming across from the car park and the open spaces. You know, the noise won't be limited to that building, it will be around the area. There'll be children running around shouting and screaming as they do, enjoying themselves. And I think this protection as a condition is very, very necessary. So I'm happy to vote for the substantive, but I definitely support this condition.
Okay. Before we go to the vote, I believe we've got a couple more speakers on this, so we'll hear the speakers on this motion first. And I believe Ash wanted to say something, and I'll come to Councillor Hammersley and then Councillor Condicourt.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the condition, I agree with my colleague Darren with respect to the likelihood of appeal. There is a risk of appeal, and that is open to the applicant here. But I think on balance, the risk is minimal. Just so members are aware, obviously, if you do approve this and bring in that condition, the applicant can apply to have that condition removed. And typically they don't fall on a weekly list. So it might be that you want to give that some consideration. Sometimes they are called in.
Councillor Tromans, I know you're on this committee, but I will allow a very brief comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this might be helpful to everybody. I understand the applicant intends to make an application towards my county councillor discretionary funding pot towards the cost. So I don't think they will find this a surprising or unacceptable amendment.
Okay, so it's likely to be a very sympathetic, or received very sympathetically. Councillor Hammersley.
Yes. Well, just echoing what I did say, keeping noise within a building. But as Mr. Smith has said, it's not just keeping that noise within that particular function room or pavilion, or whatever we shall name it. I assume this place is already being used already for football, cricket, etc., etc. So there is already, without this room, a level of noise that has been acceptable or accepted by residents for a number of years. And we assume, Jeff, that we're worried about increased use and increased noise. But the facility itself is well known in the area, and for the greater of the good and all, for the sport. So again, I would just echo the words of others that giving permission, but with conditions to alleviate as much noise as possible with the sound in fence. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Condicourt.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the diagram, I think the building immediately to the north is probably the Scout Hut, which is considerably closer to the housing than this new pavilion. So there are already noisy children going to be in the area. And looking at the diagram of the pavilion, it has absolutely no openings on the side that faces towards the housing. So I'm a bit curious as to how much fencing we actually need here, considering its impact. I don't disagree that if we need it, it should be provided, but I think we need to be a bit scientific and actually get someone to do a survey to see where needs fencing and how high, rather than arbitrarily. I mean, I assume the condition would put a fence along the whole line of that, because if you're worried about people not in the building making a noise, there could be anywhere along that boundary fence, in which case it's not just a short fence, it's actually a very long, very large fence. So I'm asking for some clarity in terms of, rather than conditioning we have to build a fence for the full length, for the full height, can we actually get someone, a condition that says officers should agree a plan of acoustic treatment, so we can actually do something sensible rather than something that's not science-based. Because we have a scout hut at one end, we've got no opening windows on the building itself, so the building itself can be its own acoustic screen. So actually the problem is people just to the north and just to the south of the building, which will depend upon the layout of the footpaths and all sorts of other things. So I just don't want to overkill with a big wall that's built in the wrong place and too long. And if we do have someone who can just actually look at the acoustics to say where the noise should be, I'd far rather do that than actually have some non-scientific, massive long fence. Because if you just do a fence that's the length of the building, it may spectacularly fail because it's not where the noise is coming from. And I say we have already got the scout hut there, so I really say we should have a condition, yes, but make sure it's to submit a plan of acoustic fencing rather than to a condition that says the fence will be 2.4 metres long and it'll be 200 metres long, because that may be inappropriate.
Okay, Darren, I don't know if you want to come back on that.
Yes, thanks, Joe. Feedback on that. Yeah, I think that would be how we would like it to be worded, condition, Councillor. It would be something along the lines of no development shall commence until a plan showing details of the fence has been submitted to and approved in writing by the council, that kind of thing. So it wouldn't just be on this boundary, it would be, we need to see a plan that says how tall it is, where it is, how long it is, and so on. And then once that's approved, then development can commence. Thank you.
I wouldn't normally allow this, but I'm going to allow Mr. Khan and Councillor Trones to come back. I know it's not normal procedure, but I'm hoping you might be able to clarify slightly, which I think what you're trying to signal, and I shall come to...
I can shed some light, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think what everybody, including the applicant, is expected is, if you look at the big rectangle underneath, white rectangle underneath the red splodge, which is the proposed development, that is the bowling, very quiet bowling pit, bowling green. It's at an angle to the horizontal line that goes across. So the idea is that the fencing would go down the diagonal line, past the horizontal line to come off a line off the so if you carry the line, the side of the bowling green across, it would, if you move the red pointer down, yeah, about there. But, back a bit. Yeah, about there. That's where the two lines intersect, and that is a very narrow space then that's probably going to have a gate on it anyway. And so 2.4 metre high acoustic boarding, that length, down to where we just indicated, coming off a straight line off the side of the bowling pitch would be about spot on. But I'm sure that's what he will be submitted to the council. And if you put the amendment in those terms, or the condition in those terms, I think that would be pretty much in line with what I've just described anyway. As far as the point about the scout hut's concerned, they're all inside. I've been up there when the scouts are on. I was up there last night. They're all in there, the little cubs and everything. You can just about hear them, but they're all contained in this building. So they're not running around outside. There's no space to run around outside the back of the scout hut, so it's not really the same thing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, is that a similar point that you were going to raise?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I much appreciate the extra time you've allowed. Just a point of information for Councillor Hammersley and the Scout hut is there. It's a well-insulated place. It's used approximately early in the evening time for youngsters, just 2 evenings a week. And they are pretty well-behaved people in there. So that, and the pitch that is out there at the moment is a grassy pitch used for toddlers, for practice, with the plan for the all-weather pitch that will change and it will give adults. In our back gardens, Chair, when the ball is kicked, even with the kiddies, you can hear every kick of the ball. It's a low level, but we're looking at a very different animal into the future with adults using the pitch and the language that goes with it, I might add.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Darren, yeah.
Thanks very much. I think one thing that the committee needs to consider really is that planning conditions should only be used to mitigate the harm that's being proposed. So if we're trying to come up with a fence that alleviates some of the existing harm, that's more of an appeal risk. That's the kind of thing that might be seen as unreasonable by an inspector if they were to appeal the condition. This planning application is for a pavilion, and any condition needs to relate to that development, not the existing harm. That's just something for members to consider before they vote. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for letting me back in. Just to clarify from my amendment, which has been seconded by Councillor Smith, I was envisaging wording along the lines of what Darren said about it would have to be agreed with the council. We're not the experts in this, and I'm sure that can be negotiated between the two parties. But just to emphasise, so it is actually on the video record as well, and I think I said this before, it's because there is additional people going into that area. So I'm not envisaging it to be tackling an existing harm. It might benefit an existing harm, but the primary purpose behind my amendment is we are putting additional people in that space, which will be closer to the residents, and you are likely to have people out there socialising, drinking, having a cigarette, as I said before, and more sporting usage up there, which will generate more noise. Given the levels of the land, I think it is a reasonable addition to put in, given the extra facilities which are being added in. So I'm quite clear on my purpose behind my amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for that clarification. That's a really important clarification to have. I think we have enough information now. I think we've heard all our speakers that want to speak on this item. So the next thing I'd like to do is move to the actual amendment itself to add this extra condition. So if we can move to a vote for that. So all those in favour of that amendment to the conditions. Okay, all those against? All those abstaining? Okay, so one abstention. Okay, so that's moved. So we've now got to obviously finish off this discussion. So are there any other points aside from the acoustic boarding, fencing, sorry, that anyone wishes to raise? Councillor Concourt.
Thank you, Chair. I think the only other thing, just to clarify, officers, is there any spotlighting or lights? Because obviously this is on higher ground, so I don't know if there's any conditions on lighting at the back of the pavilion to make, and particularly with the nature corridor that those allotments are, I wouldn't like any light spill at the back of the pavilion. So if we could maybe think about conditioning that if there was any proposal light, it doesn't spill outside the boundary of the site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Do you want to come back on that?
Thank you. No, the pavilion application itself doesn't propose any floodlighting. If that was done at a later stage, it would require separate permission, and we could assess it at that stage. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I have one question. It's kind of linked to the sound issue, but it's not about the fencing. It's regards to the smoking area. So how are we mitigating with the smoking area, the outdoor smoking area, to make sure that that's not going to cause undue sort of noise pollution?
Just to be clear again, the applicant had applied for a pavilion. Although some objectors believe it may be rented out at a later stage, or not rented out, let out for functions, that's not ostensibly what they've applied for. It's a pavilion so that people can watch the football that's being played on these mini pitches. There is no mitigation for a smoking shelter because that's not the primary use of what they've applied for. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so but if, I'm guessing people will smoke, and if it's hired out for social functions, people are going to go outside and smoke. So surely there would need to be some kind of area for smokers to congregate in, but also to congregate in such a way that they're not going to be creating additional noise for residents.
There's no requirement in planning legislation to provide a smoking shelter. They may choose to have one that would be likely to require permission at a separate stage if they were to put one in. That's probably as much as I can say on that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do I have any other questions from or comments from any of the committee? No. In that case, can we move to the vote then? So all those in favour to grant permission? Okay. All those against? And abstentions? One abstention. Okay, thank you for your perseverance on that item. It's quite a long item. Okay, so we now move to the next item, which is... Yeah. So while we're swapping over the officers, we'll get Councillor Evans. Thank you, Councillor Evans. Thank you for your perseverance outside. Just looking at the time, guys, councillors, it is 8:45 almost. If we want to continue these for the last two items, we may need to suspend standing orders. So do I have anyone who's happy to propose?
I'll move a suspension of standing orders, Chair, to complete business.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. And Councillor Crofts has seconded that. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour, to get through the business? Thank you very much. Those against? Okay, and any abstentions? No, so that is carried. Thank you.
This application is for single-storey extensions to the front, side and rear at the Camp Hill Dental Practice on Camp Hill Road, Nuneaton. It is being reported to committee at the request of Councillor Cooper. Objections have been received as detailed on the agenda. The applicant has stated that the need for the extensions is due to COVID to provide additional staff room area, waiting room area and for storage necessary for PPE and to increase the size of the downstairs surgery room to cater for disabled people. They have confirmed that there will be no more surgery rooms and therefore the proposal will not intensify the existing use or mean that patient numbers will be increased. The proposal will provide approximately an extra 6 square metres of floor space in the waiting area. Condition 3 has been added to ensure that the proposed ground floor remains as per any approval given and that no extra treatment rooms could be provided from that already existing. In terms of residential amenity, there are a number of properties that surround the site. In terms of number 204 Camp Hill Road, the proposed single-storey side extension appears to be proposed up to the boundary with that property. The gutter detailing has been amended to show that this is a parapet wall so it does not overhang this neighbouring property. The only window to the side of this neighbour is to a landing which is not protected. The neighbour has raised concerns as the gap to the side of this neighbour is relatively small and they have meter cupboards and utilities on this side of their property. So access would be required. However, this is not a planning issue. It is considered that this side extension would not affect any front or rear windows or their private amenity space. At the moment, the current single-storey rear extension to the dentist projects slightly further than that neighbour's conservatory. So that's the extension there that's existing. The proposed single-storey rear extension is to project to a further depth of 3.1 metres. However, as it will be set off the boundary by 4.5 metres, this is considered acceptable. In terms of the impact of number 6, the single-storey side extension will be 26 metres from the rear windows of this property, which complies with distance standards. In relation to the rear extension, this is only slightly in line with this neighbour's property and is approximately 19.5 metres away from their windows. The windows to the proposed staff room have now been removed, so that the distance to this neighbour's rear windows is considered acceptable. There is 5 metres from the rear of the proposed single-storey rear extension to the amenity space of numbers 4 and 6 Hillside Drive. The staff room is to be served by roof lights, which would not lead to any overlooking. Condition 4 has been added to ensure that no external windows or openings is provided. In relation to number 210 Campbell Road, this is the nearest house to the other side of 206. It is considered that the proposed single-storey side extension, which is on the opposite side boundary, would have no impact. The proposed rear extension is over 12 metres away from the boundary with that property and would not be in line with any windows. In relation to ancillary equipment and refuse facilities, there are already 3 extraction units on the sides of the buildings and 1 to the rear. In addition, there is a compressor unit facing the side of 204, which would have to be removed if the side extension was approved. Environmental Health have concerns that the current acoustic treatment to this is likely to be inadequate. However, only the plan that is required for the new rooms or those that are to be removed as part of this application can be considered as part of this current application. Environmental Health have no objection providing there is no new outside plant, including any new air conditioning units. The agent has assured the council that any new plant will be internally fitted, including the new compressor. Condition 6 has been added to ensure that no external plant is installed and to ensure any new plant is acceptable in terms of noise to neighbouring properties. A large refuse bin sited at the side of the property would have to be moved if the side extension is approved. The practice manager has advised that medical waste would be stored inside if the extensions are built, which is actually required by their own legislation. However, it is unclear where this will be situated, but nonetheless there will still be a need for some non-medical bins to outside the property. An area for bins is shown to the side, and condition 5 has been added to control the refuse area with no further external outside storage permitted. In terms of visual amenity, the proposed front windows match the character of the existing, and so does the roof form, and the materials will also match. In terms of massing, it is considered that the proposals are in keeping with the property and there will be no significant visual impact from the extensions. In relation to highway safety, the site now only has 2 formal parking spaces and room for a car to the side of the building. There is potentially room for 2 further cars which are not marked out as spaces. There was originally an agreement in place for parking at the former public house, but no evidence has been provided to state that this is still in place. There is a small local centre on the opposite side of the road at the junction of Craddock Drive that does have some car parking spaces. The Council's Emerging Transport Matters SPD, which contains parking standards, is currently was previously consulted on but does not carry full weight. This states that 3 spaces per consulting or treatment room are required, which would actually equate to 12 spaces. County Highways have objected to the various iterations of the proposal and are still objecting to the current scheme, even though there are no new treatment rooms proposed. The grounds of objection are that the new areas are large enough to be used as new treatment rooms in the future, which would intensify the use of the site, and that details have not been provided to show where the bin and storage cage will be located, which could affect parking. To mitigate this, condition 3 has been added to ensure that there's no further treatment rooms provided, and condition 5 restricts any further outside storage. Condition 7 is also added to ensure that the parking space to the side of the building is retained in perpetuity. The recommendation is therefore approval, subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have one speaker, which is Councillor Cooper. So, Councillor Cooper.
Microphone's not working. It's on, yeah, right. On behalf of next door and nearby residents, I oppose this application. This application, with no new updates, was turned down in 2007. The property was built as a normal sized home, not as a business premises, therefore only limited parking space. This leads to problems of parking on the main road, blocking driveways and on double yellow lines. I know highways have concerns and are against this. It would also be an overdevelopment of the site. I urge the committee to turn down this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Does anyone have any points of clarification? No. In that case, do I have somebody who would like to propose the recommendation in front of us? Okay, so I shall move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? For debate, of course. Okay, do I have any speakers on this item? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I've got real concerns over this. And, a side development, a front development, a little bit added onto the back. I am going to propose that I have a site visit so I can look at massing, how it looks in the street scene, and in terms of car parking. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that proposal of a site visit? So, Councillor Condacor, thank you. Can I ask then all those in favour of a site visit? Can I have a show of hands, please, on that matter? 1, 2. That's it. So that's been turned down. Okay. Sorry. That's all in favour. Those against? Sorry, my apologies. Getting carried away. Councillor Cooper can't vote because you're not on this committee. Okay, and yeah, okay, it's lost. And do I have any abstentions just for the records? No. Okay, thank you. So I think Councillor Wilson, you wanted to come in, and then Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. I know this site reasonably well, having walked up and down that street God knows how many times in recent memory. I understand, and it says quite clearly on page 104 of our agenda in the last but one paragraph, that officers consider this to be a balancing exercise. And I can see why they have arrived at their conclusion, and I accept it is probably a finely balanced one. I think it is. But in my view, I think this is an over-intensive use of the site. This is, in my view, adding a significant amount of floor space to the surgery. I accept that dental surgeries are needed, and I also accept that COVID is providing, as I think most of us who are still in the world of work, is providing significant challenges to how we have to work. But I think we also have to look at the long-term impacts of this application, and I just cannot support this application, Chair. That's what I don't think a site visit would actually help me come to any other conclusion. I think it is significantly over-intensive, enough for me to tip the balance the other way, so as to be one of refusal. And if it comes to it, I accept that I'll have to listen to officers' advice if it was to go that way, but I would move, or potentially move, a refusal if this motion is lost on the grounds of over-intensive use of the site. I don't think it would necessarily be incongruous with the street scene. I know that's another one that we've used in the past, but down that neck of Camp Hill Road, there are a variety of uses and styles of properties down there, so I think that would be a very difficult one to hang our hat on. But I think certainly looking at the floor plan and the map, particularly on page 107, I think that is very over-intensive use of the plot of land, Chair.
Thank you for that insight, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Condecourt.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with Councillor Wilson. This is a normal size house which has been super expanded, and the highways never usually keep objections on. They start putting an objection on, and then they go through the details and they try and work out how we can do mitigation or whatever. But this site is just nowhere near big enough to have more building on it and less parking. I mean, I'm not in favour of lots of parking, but yeah, when you walk past any dental surgery, we go past the one on Hinkley Road, cars are streaming out. The number of parking spaces you need, the way dentists work of getting patients in, getting the next one in, etc. You do need that 12 parking spaces or something close to it for 2 surgeries. And just looking at the planning history, I've never seen a planning application with so much planning history. The number of times this site has been changed, knocked about, etc. It has gone past being anything that can fit on that site. So I'm perfectly happy second the refusal. And it is unbelievable how much is going on there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condecourt. Councillor Hamsley.
It repeatedly says from years gone by that this has maxed its use from every point whatsoever. And also it does a neighbour who has concerns where his meters are so close, or would be, or however, it's not a planning issue as stated, but it wouldn't allow the neighbour to be able to read meters for electricity or power. So that seems rather unfair, too close, and would leave the neighbour in predicament with his energy sources. So again, it's, for me, I would decline this application.
Okay, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually visited this site the other week and spoken to residents there. This is a gross overdevelopment of this site. It was never intended to be a business of this size. And if you read through some of that history, we've conditioned before that only 2 dentists should be operating from there. There are 4 dentists, and because of the wording in that condition, we've not been able to enforce it. It's grossly overdeveloped. I personally witnessed while I was there very dangerous reversing of cars off their drive into the main road because there was no parking. They've got 2 to 3 spaces, and our new DPD will call for 12. It's not even close. And the harm caused to local residents, I know it's not a planning issue, but with cars blocking their drives because there's nowhere else to park, it is a real nuisance to people. This business has proved repeatedly they do not comply with conditions. They were supposed to, in a previous condition, put obscured glazing in the back windows. They've never done it. Residents have continually complained about it, and they just refused to do it. So I think conditioning things for this application just isn't going to work. I think we have a very strong, for a change, objection from highways, and I think we should go with that, along with the overdevelopment of the site.
Okay, do I have any other speakers before I move to the vote? Okay, so in front of us then we have a move to accept the recommendation. All those, sorry. Right, so...
Chair, if it helps, I said if the motion falls, I would move one. As I understand it, Chair, we have to vote on the recommendation because what I would prefer to do is opposite to the substantive motion. So if the substantive motion falls, then I would have to move another motion, presumably.
I assumed we had to move to the recommendation because nobody's proposed that we refuse. Well, nobody's proposed, and it hasn't been seconded, that we refuse.
I think, Chair, before you take the first vote, you need to ask the officers to consider the reasons for the potential reasons for refusal.
Okay, so please bear with us 1 second while we consult the officers.
As Councillor Wilson mentioned as in the report, it is balanced. It's a very balanced application. In terms of sort of the intensification, officers feel that the use of those suggested conditions would not lead to an intensification of that use. So controlling the amount of treatment rooms, conditions about parking and things. The MPPF, in terms of parking and highway safety, does make it clear that the impact would have to be severe on highway safety for us to refuse an application. I don't believe highways have used the word severe in their response. Obviously, they have objected. In terms of the parking numbers, they're not something that we could necessarily refuse an application on because we haven't got any saved and adopted parking standards.
Yes, Councillor Condecourt.
If it helps, I think we're minded to object on the over-intensive use, which is supported by the objection from the county, but is not actually a highways reason for refusal. It's the fact that it's the over-intensification, but that obviously then produces a highways problem.
So I think the question to officers is that a defendable reason for refusal? And I think this application is closely balanced. So with respect to the over-intensification, and we've referred to massing, you can use that as a refusal reason. That said, I think there is risk of challenge with respect to this application. So ultimately, as members of the committee, you're just going to have to weigh that up.
Thank you. So it does appear that it is finally balanced. So do I have a recommendation then to?
Chair, I was only going to, if it did fall, but if you want a formal amendment because we haven't yet gone on, I was only going to move on over intensification and massing because, having read the report and listened to the officers' presentation, whilst county highways have put in an objection, the suggested conditions got around that objection. I can't remember which one it is now. It was to do about the number of treatment rooms, I think it was, that in response to the county. But I still believe that the physical nature of what is proposed to be built would be over-intensive and on the site, and therefore lead to over-massing on the site. So I would move, if we're going to do it that way, I will move refusal on those grounds.
Okay, so I will in that case remove the current recommendation and ask if we're happy to move Councillor Wilson's recommendation. So Councillor Evans? Sorry, as a seconded, because you originally seconded. Yeah, sorry. Just to and it's been a long evening for everybody. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a proposer then to change that, and then obviously we've got that's been seconded. So
Councillor Wilson's now moving refusal.
Yeah. And yeah, that's been seconded then by Councillor Evans. Okay.
And do we want to just clarify the wording of the reason for refusal, Chair?
Yeah, so it was on grounds of over-intensification, I think was the main reason put before us, and massing.
Yeah, the words I've picked up are the size and scale, and massing would lead to over-intensification.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're happy to put that in. So can we then have a vote, all those in favour of the new recommendation? Okay, all those against? Okay, abstentions? Thank you everyone for your perseverance. So we got there in the end. Whew, it's been a long evening, hasn't it? Okay, and we've still got one item to go, which is item number 8 on 11 Ribbonbrook, Nuneaton. So thank you. You're free to go, Councillor Cooper, if you so wish.
Okay, this application seeks consent to remove a lime tree known as T4, which is covered by Tree Preservation Order number 1197. T4 is located within the rear garden of the property, close to the western boundary with number 10, and it forms part of an original row of 5 lime trees covered by the TPO. The applicant states that the removal is required due to concerns regarding the proximity of the tree to numbers 10 and 11, shading within the rear garden and the falling of excess branches and sticky sap. The tree in question, along with the neighbouring trees at the rear of the properties on Ribbonbrook, were covered by TPO in 1997. National Planning Guidance on Tree Preservation Orders and Trees in Conservation Areas is that the local authorities should assess the impact of the proposal on the amenity of the area and whether the proposal is justified, having regard to the reasons and additional information put forward in support of it. The TPO covers 5 lime trees in Ribbonbrook, 4 of which are located in the rear gardens of numbers 3, 6, 8 and 11. The tree at the rear of number 8, Ribbonbrook, has been subject to previous applications for felling which were refused. However, a further application in 2018 for the felling of the neighbouring tree was recommended by officers for refusal, but was approved at committee, subject to the provision of a replacement tree. However, a replacement tree could not be agreed upon, and a subsequent application was submitted to fell the tree and not to provide a replacement. This was recommended by officers for approval due to the previous recommendation of committee and was subsequently approved by committee in 2019. Similarly, in an application was also to fell the tree at number 6 with no replacement was taken to committee with a recommendation of refusal, but was granted by committee. However, it is not considered that a precedent for the removal of surrounding trees has been set. Officers consider that the tree does have visual amenity value not just to the properties on Ribbonbrook, but to the surrounding area, particularly the adjacent destination park. The view from the park is considered to break up the artificial straight lines of housing and fencing, creating a high amenity need and benefit of the remaining trees on Ribbonbrook. The TPO was put on to protect the trees during construction of the houses of the estate, as they had significant amenity value at the time. Whilst it could be argued that loss of one individual tree may not have significant harm, members should consider that this could set a detrimental precedent and lead the way to the loss of the whole row, which cumulatively would lead to a detriment of the overall visual amenity of the area. Therefore, the implications for the loss of this tree are wider. If the wooded area of the railway embankment, which is outside the council's jurisdiction, was removed, if the felling of the trees was allowed, there will be no screening for the railway. The Parks Officer was consulting on the application. The recommendation received was one of refusal, as no technical evidence has been provided that justifies the removal. They state that the shading has not been shown to be extreme as the tree is situated to the northwest of the property. Aerial images show clear vegetative growth in the garden that would evidence sufficient natural light provision. He also states that the height and size are not justifiable reasons to remove a tree without other factors being present. It has also been argued that fall from trees is a common natural phenomenon, and the Parks Officer has advised that tree removals in relation to general fall from trees would set a precedent that would undermine the TPA process. It is considered that the tree does still hold amenity value within the area, and that the removal of this tree could set a precedent for others within the row, and therefore the recommendation is one of refusal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got a statement from Councillor Sargent, and I've got two speakers, Mr Hollyoake and Mr Gallimore, who I'd just like to thank you very much for your perseverance with what's been a rather long evening for everybody, including yourselves. So I'm going to ask Mr Richardson to read out Councillor Sargent's statement.
Thank you, Chair. This is the statement from Councillor Sargent. I would like to raise an objection to the refusal of planning permission to remove this lime tree on the following grounds. Number one, this tree is in the back garden of number 11 Ribbon Brook. Beyond the rear boundary fence is a brook. Beyond the brook, the railway embankment raises to about 30 feet, to which the public have no access. Number two, number 11 sits at the end of a cul-de-sac. There are no footpaths connecting other roads and no other thoroughfares. Number three, the tree itself can only be seen over the top of the garage, and you must be directly in front to see it. It cannot be seen on the approach to number 11. Number four, the railway embankment has many trees and plenty of shrubbery on it. Number five, the resident has two other trees in the garden at number 11, which they maintain to a good standard. The council's argument that this tree holds an amenity value seems to me to be weak, as it's in a back garden and it's only the resident and one neighbour that can see it, and both would like to see it removed. I also don't see the value in replacing it either, as it will still be the resident and the neighbour who can see it, and there are many trees surrounding the rear of the property. The council claims that it can be seen from the destination park, Riversley Park and Pingles, don't stack up, as the railway line sits about 25 feet up and the houses block the view. In conclusion, the TPO must be removed to allow the felling of this tree, with no need to replace it. If the committee are unsure, I would request a site visit. I've included some additional pictures. Number 11 is highlighted with a yellow dot and the brook with a yellow line. And Chair, those pictures are on the table in front of the dais here.
Okay, thank you. Have all councillors had the chance to have a look at those pictures? Yeah, and to consider those. Okay, thank you. I'll now move to Mr Hollyoake, who is the applicant involved, and then I'll move to Mr Gallimore, who is going to speak in support of that application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. Just one correction on that. The fence at the back, it says that there's a brook at the back there. It's not. It's just a drainage ditch off the railway embankment. Okay. Yeah, we purchased number 11 Ribbon Brook new in 1998, and we're told at that point the builders had removed half the row of trees that were at the back of the houses. I originally thought keeping some of the mature trees was a great idea, but we soon found out that there's a recognised nuisance problem with lime trees, which are caused by bugs which feed off them. They deposit sticky honeydew on everything around the tree, which develops into a sticky black mould. The little research I've done advises us that there's no effective way to control the bugs, and it's impossible to prevent the mould. So patios and walls need to be regularly washed by a pressure washer to keep them clean. Soon after moving in, neighbours were referring to the lime trees as these damn trees. Either they had one in their garden or there was one next door, and they were causing problems. Over the years, several residents have commented that all the trees should have been removed when the houses were built, due to the problems they cause. And in recent years, you've granted permission for 2 of the lime trees in neighbouring gardens to be removed. My tree in number 11 and the tree in number 11 now are the only 2 that remain, other than the one that sits on the riverbank. While we have lived at Ribbon Brook, we've had to reseed a section of the lawn with seed that is especially suitable to shaded areas, and replaced several plants near the tree that have died. We tried more mature plants, but again, these always seem to die within a couple of years. We've now resorted to installing a garden tap to supply sufficient water, as we still need as a precautionary to routinely monitor and to routinely water the lawn and plants in the vicinity of the tree for several months of the year. Tree T4 is situated in our garden, and we obtained permission a few years ago to have the tree pollarded, but that just stimulated the growth. Within a couple of years, it had grown larger than before. My belief now is that any tree of this size is totally inappropriate in a short garden such as we have. It's taller than the depth of the garden, it's taller than the house, and the canopy hangs about 3 metres from the house. T4 ceased to be a public amenity when the houses were built. It's enclosed within our garden between the house and the tree-lined railway embankment. The tree is only partially visible between the houses 10 and 11 to anyone who is walking past the end of the cul-de-sac or turning round their car. And as we're the end of the row, there's very few passers-by. In winter months, when it has no leaves, the spindly branches can't even be considered attractive. In fact, the tree-lined embankment behind proves a more pleasant view. We've now lived at this house for 23 years, and in all that time, we've had the same neighbours at number 10. We have always had good relations with them, but over the last few years, the nuisance caused by this tree has become a tension between us, resulting in them contacting the council themselves and asking if they can cut back the tree due to black mould. If we're granted permission to remove the tree, we will plant something else in place, but would want something that is more suitable in a short residential garden, and something where we could control the size, the same as do annually with the other trees in our garden. I thank you for the time and allow me to speak at your meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollyhoak. Does anyone have any points of clarification? Yeah, Councillor Contecourt.
Sorry, Councillor Sargent said that it should be removed with no replacement, and you said you're happy for replacement. Can I just clarify that you are happy, and what it would be a reasonable size of tree you'd be happy to have as a replacement, providing it with a suitable species?
Yeah, we're happy to replace it. I mean, we're not just going to leave a gap in the garden. The rest of the place we've got hedges and that around there. So we'll be looking at hedge or something. But I'd be looking at something that is suitable to a small garden like that, and is also not going to leave us with a sticky mess like we've got at the moment. I mean, the other 2 trees we've got on the other side of the garden, we keep them trimmed to about 10 or 12 foot. So, yeah, that sort of thing. We'd be looking at the Royal Horticultural Society and see what they can recommend, or whether we'll just put hedging in.
Hello, yes, thank you, Chair. You said you had it pollarded once. Were you given any instructions to the maximum that you could have it pollarded for then the length of years for it to regain its original growth? Or did you just have a bit trimmed and just it grew back? Just you saying it grew back just as quick and larger in such a short time. So I wonder if arboriculturist gave you any advice. You could trim it to a maximum of whatever to allow so many years of growth to where it is.
Yes, we used a tree surgeon to actually obviously submit the application for us and everything else, but we had it trimmed to the maximum we could at the time. So basically all the branches came off it.
Okay, thank you. Any other points of clarification? No. Okay, in that case, I'll ask Mr. Gallimore if he'd like to make his statement in support of...
Sorry, could I just say that my next door neighbour, who the tree also affects, at number 10, is unfortunately out of the country on holiday at the moment, but he wanted to speak, and so what he's done, he's written a statement out for another neighbour of ours, Mr. Galloway, to speak on his behalf.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of Mr.
You need to step forward.
Sorry. I'm speaking on behalf of Mr. Orkley, that lives at number 10. Now, he has a problem with that tree because the tree is constantly dropping black sticky substance. The tree sheds this constantly. This has ruined our garden throughout the years. It has grown so huge since the last pollarding,
and it continues to block out natural light. It blackens our garden furniture and decorative wall, hence we have to constantly renew it. Other neighbours have been granted permission to have their trees removed. Why is there discrimination to this tree? You cannot see this tree from the park, yet trees close to the park have been removed. I'll explain that in a minute. It creates conflicts when our garden is ruined by the black substance to our gardens. Constant use of water to try and remove this sticky tar from the garden and the furniture. Please consider removal of the tree mentioned here. Now, this tree is part of a row of trees that were planted and go, I don't know whether you know the running track, they run from the arches and they ran originally right down to the Anchor River. Now, when these houses were built in 1998, it would have been common sense to have taken the last 4 or 5 trees out, because, as it's said before, 2 of the trees have had permission to be removed. The trees are no benefit to anyone. No one can see them apart from Alan and the neighbours. I'm right over the road. I can't see it. Just at the tip of the top. And the tree is really of no benefit to anybody. So why it should be considered for preservation, I don't know. I don't know the reason. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. Any points for clarification, Councillor Hamsley?
Just one more thing. Is there any ingress on with the root system to the house and its foundations?
Nothing that I know of. I don't think so at the moment. I'm not aware of anything.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Hamsley? Okay, so we've got the recommendation to refuse planning permission as printed. For purposes of debate, do I have somebody to propose this? Councillor Smith, and do I have a seconder for this? So Councillor Shepherd, thank you. Okay, so do I have any speakers on this? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question of officers, and I suspect the answer is no, but I'll ask it anyway. Given that this T4 is part of the wider order of Tree Preservation Order 11 of 97, I'm concerned about consistency because, as the speakers have mentioned, it depends which committee you end up before as to what happens. Could we not, in theory, just remove the whole order against all of the trees, given that we have an application before us as part of that whole order? I'm not saying that I'm well, I probably am actually minded to grant permission because I think precedent has already been set, but I am concerned that it is dependent upon who you are actually going before as to what answer you get. Now, if we're going to remove it, we should, in my view, we should do it for all of them and just get rid of the order. If we're going to keep them, we should make that stance. I think it's unfair on residents to take pot luck as to who actually turns up at the committee on an issue like this. If it's a house, I can understand it. It's down to individual tastes, etc. But I'm coming to the view that with this line of trees, it's particularly unfair, actually. So if we were minded to grant permission to fell, I think we might as well just grant it for, or not to necessarily fell, but to remove the TPO. We should do it for all of them. And if they want to fell them, they fell them. If they want to keep them, they can keep them. But it's a difficult one, Chair, but I think I'd ask the question because I think we actually need some clarity over that.
The application isn't considering removing the TPO. What it's applying for is to remove a tree which is covered by that TPO. So the TPO would still be in place across the rest of that order. In terms of consistency, when we've had previous applications on other houses that are affected by the order, the advice has always been the same from the tree officer, which we use as part of assessing this sort of application. He is the expert. So that advice has been consistent all the way through. So everyone's treated the same way and it's been assessed in the same way in terms of removing the tree. Obviously, when it comes to committee, you have a completely, yes, you're right to assess it and weigh up and come to a different conclusion and decision. But the order would still remain with the other tree. And if everybody else wanted to fell their trees that were covered, they would have to apply the same as this applicant has applied.
Okay, Councillor Wilkinson, have you got any further questions or come back on this?
I suspected the answer would be no, and although I can see Phil cogitating slightly on that one. I mean, if the answer were to be that yes, we could revoke the whole TPO, I think I would go with revoking the whole TPO now, because I think I accept that officers have done your bit, and you have actually been, you are right, from memory, you have been consistent across all of them. It's the committee which has been, depending on who you get, and I don't think it's fair for residents to live like that, but I think on balance, I will not vote with the recommendation to refuse. I think a precedent has been set, and I think it would be unfair for one neighbour to have one tree cut down, then someone 2 doors down or whatever it is, not to have it. I think that ship has particularly sailed now.
Having just consulted Mr Richardson on the legalities of it, I think the advice is that we deal with the matter in front of us tonight, but then we perhaps look at this as a separate issue in terms of a TPO and whether that should then be removed, and maybe that's not something that this committee to consider right here and right now. But I do share your sentiments actually on this one, Councillor Wilson. I imagine there's probably a lot of sympathy around the chamber for what you've just said as well. Councillor Hammersley. Sorry.
Can we just, Claire, just come back on something?
Yeah, sorry, Claire.
Sort of, you've just took the words out of my mouth, really. It's a separate process which legal would be able to advise on in terms of the revocation process, but it's a separate process to the application before us tonight.
Okay, so that's what we will perhaps I'll put in and sort of see where we go for next steps, because I think, as you rightly say, it's something that needs to be looked at in the wider sense as well. Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Alan, if it is an option to have the tree removed and then be replaced with something which is more manageable, I mean, we can go with that if that is possible. I've had an oak tree fall through my house, and trust me, it's not pleasant, and it cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I thought I was Tarzan swinging around the bedroom. Trust me, it's not pleasant. But although I don't think this tree is likely to fall over and crash through your house, but I can understand your problems. So I'm not sure if we can. We like to see tree. Mr Condacor especially is averse to chopping anything down. But if it can be replaced, I would like to go with, if we can have it removed, but replaced with something more manageable, then everyone's happy. And then deal with, as Chris said, the TPO, getting it removed at a later stage for all of them, to at least then give other residents the option to do the same. Thank you.
Councillor Condacor.
Thank you. I'm very keen on trees getting replaced, so that's an absolute must. But also the wider question, the TPOs are there so we remain a wooded and green borough. So the trees will die, trees need replacement, and the big problem we've got is we haven't planted trees in the borough in any significant numbers for years. And I'm sure the residents would be happy if we planted more oaks along with the anchor, or we need to find places to plant trees before we just go around cutting even more down. And the big mistake was actually right back when these houses were planned, and I hope the planning committee look at trees they want to do TPOs on and actually set the houses back to allow the trees to grow, because I mean the trees are providing massive amount of drainage. They're actually too good, so you are then having to water the ground. So it's a failure of how we've designed things in the past. And so I really say to the committee, yes, we need sometimes to take trees out, but we need to plant 2, 3, 4 trees for everyone we take out. And we can't just revoke TPOs. We need a tree policy. And maybe that needs to go into how close we plant houses to trees, and a bigger thing. I'm very pleased the applicant is talking about replacement, but this late at night, I don't want people saying, I want to keep every tree, because obviously trees get replaced. Different trees have different life. But we do need to think of this as a long-term policy, and this borough needs to add to the number of trees, and particularly in Riversey Park, where there's a massive replanting of the park. Maybe 5 trees of this size could be planted somewhere in the park, more suitable, so we have the same amount of trees in Riversey Park.
I think we need to just keep ourselves on topic at the moment.
I just want
I do understand what you're saying, Councillor Condacor, completely. I think everybody grasps that. But I think we need to stick with the matters at hand, and I think the matters of the TPO are not for this really for us to consider right now in its broader sense. That's not something this committee can deal with right now. It's something which we'll have to pass. And we've got the sort of portfolio holder here, which I'm sure is probably taking some notes here as well in terms of planning, and I imagine there's a few other portfolio holders as well. So this is what we need to go back to and we need to consult on properly. So I'm not going to allow further conversation on that aspect of it. So if you have other points that are relevant and pertinent to this case, Councillor Condacor, then please feel free to stay them. Otherwise, I'd like to move on.
Yeah, if I could just ask the officers about the tree replacement wording, just so we get something of a suitable size that's big enough to be useful in terms of a tree.
Yeah, a condition would refer to a replacement tree, details to be submitted in terms of the specimen, the size, location, which would then have to consult our tree officer on.
Sorry, Mr. Gilmore, I see you've got your hand up. I'll only allow it if it's a point where you're going to clarify something that's already been said.
I just want to, the recommendation, it says that the tree still holds amenity value. What is meant by
right,
that?
We're not going to get into the discussion. I only want to know if you've got anything that is going to add to this debate right now. So I do apologise for not taking that comment, but I am trying to move this through, and I think members will understand and be able to interpret that for themselves. Councillor Hammersley.
Providing I could understand that we don't replace like for like, because then we'll be in the same position some years away, I know, but replace with a manageable species of tree.
So I'm kind of getting a sense here that many of the members here are probably not for the current recommendation as it stands. So I think there's a couple of options open to us. We can either try and arrange a site visit to actually go and have a look at this in more detail, or we can sort of look at the recommendation in front of us and put another recommendation in place, which is perhaps more in keeping with where we want to go, because I'm kind of getting that sense that people don't really want this recommendation as it stands. Okay, so I don't know if anyone wishes to propose a different recommendation. Will I have to do that?
Yes, if Councillor Smith is happy to withdraw his recommendation, which is as printed.
Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. It's a very sensible idea. So withdraw the recommendation as printed.
Okay, Councillor Shepherd. Okay, so both have indicated that they are happy. So then, in that case, if we have a new recommendation, which is to allow this tree to actually be felled, with the condition that we look to plant something more suitable in the area once it's been felled. Would that be acceptable? Thank you. So can I have so I'll propose that. So can I have a seconder, Councillor Evans? Thank you for seconding. In that case, we'll move to a vote. So all those in favour of that then? Okay, so I think that's not quite. We nearly got there. Okay, those against and abstentions. Thank you. One abstention, so close as well. Okay, so that motion is carried then. Okay, so thank you very much. Okay, I will now say thank you to everybody involved tonight. It's been a mammoth marathon session, so thank you very much for your perseverance, particularly our last two speakers had to wait right until the end of the evening. Thank you to all the members of the committee, and thank you very much to all the officers. I will now call this meeting closed.